What is up? What is up? What is up, ladies and gentlemen? This is You're the Vet. I am the host, Robert Graves, and thank you for tuning in yet once again to let me introduce you to another vet who's doing phenomenal things out there and giving back to the community with his story about transition and the lessons learned. That's what You're the Vet is. It is a platform dedicated for other vets to come on and tell their stories in order to help our community, the veteran community, win. And you win by getting the lessons learned from other vets who have gone through the same road and the trials and tribulations and the downs that you've gone through and have embraced the suck so you don't have to. I mean, face it, we all still will. However, if you have the opportunity to get the information on, I don't know, let's say how to get into acting, like with my conversation with Shannon Colbert, or how to start podcasting, which is some information that my guest today, Tim Mossholder, is going to share. That's what we're here for. This is what You're the Vet is, to make it so that you can be successful on whatever path you choose by giving you stories from other people who've walked that same path or something similar. Some business before pleasure, as always. You're the Vet is on all social media sites that don't involve swiping left or right. You're the Vet is also on all major podcast platforms, including iHeartRadio and Spotify now. Yay! And if you want to, no, not if you want to, I'm asking you politely by telling you to get over to You're the Vet on all your social media platforms and like it, subscribe, follow, whatever the action is on that site, and get over to iTunes and write a review. Please, I'm telling you, it absolutely helps other individuals find You're the Vet, and that's what it's for, right? What's a podcast that doesn't get listened to? Sniff, sniff. Anyway, the last order of business is that there is still a campaign going on for getting 500,000 books into the hands of those transitioning service members and into the hands of veterans that are out there that are looking for extra information on how to come up in the world, get back on their feet, and walk the straight line properly. 500,000 books. I need your help. Please get on over to you'rethevet.com/donate, and you'll see that you can purchase one book to donate, or you can send up to 10,000 books out and help me send books to veterans across the globe and help our community flourish. It takes a village. It really does. And I need your help. And if those packages are not within your price range, by all means, donate what you can, and I will figure out how many books can be donated from your contribution. I want to thank you in advance for helping me out. We've got a few thousand books already up. And now on to pleasure. Tim Mossholder is the man. He is not a pastor, so if you Google Tim Mossholder and see Pastor Mossholder, that is not Tim, but they are Facebook friends, as you'll find out soon in this conversation. Even though that information is not really relevant, let me tell you a little bit about Tim. Tim works for Bradley Morris as a transition service expert. He's also a podcast host for Bradley Morris's sponsored veteran influencer podcast, V.I.P., and he's just an all-around knowledgeable guy. What he didn't write in his notes that I was just blown away by was that he was also a candidate for flight school through the Navy Aviation program, and he shares some pretty cool stories from that time in his life. I know that I don't normally do a lot of or ever do any military service podcast, but I mean, I just had to keep asking questions. I never talked to a guy outside of a bar in the Philippines who had ever flown a few G's. I mean, it's not that common, and therefore I had to take advantage and give you the opportunity to hear those stories too. And so Tim does share a lot about his service and his transition on the way out. Tim also shares a lot about what Bradley Morris offers and what they do and what they're continuing to offer and how they're changing the game of getting you hired. If you are a veteran, or if you are, as Tim quotes, 51% sure that you're getting out, hit Bradley Morris up, bradleymorris.com, And definitely get involved with one of their recruiters and give yourself the best case scenario for getting out and not having to figure it out on your own. Transition will be hard. That's what it is. That's what happens. Like, you have to figure some stuff out. But why not figure some stuff out while you've got a steady paycheck coming in your pocket and you don't have to live on somebody's couch or in the back of a car or even look for a car? I'm telling you, man, this is the conversation you have to listen to if you want to figure out how to be successful on the outside. Even though Tim was recently married and has a newlywed wife waiting for him at the house, he gave me a significant amount of his time, and I appreciate you for that, Tim. Thank you so much. And I urge you guys to please check out the show notes and see what we're talking about. Check out the links and tap into Tim if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about in this podcast. I don't want to take up any more of your time, so I will introduce you to Tim Mossholder. Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay.
I'm excited for this. I'm not going to lie.
What did you have for breakfast today?
What did I have for breakfast today? I had a small portion of leftover bucatini carbonara that I made last night for dinner, and I had a...
Oh, I forgot my pasta in the refrigerator. Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, I watched the Bon Appetit YouTube channel religiously, and that one's pretty easy. All their like Italian hand-tossed pasta dishes are all like 4-ingredient, 5-ingredient, so... easy to freelance on a night if you got a wedge of Parmesan and some water in your house.
I bet as a newly married man, that is like everything that a woman could ask for.
Yeah, that's the running joke. When we did our registry at Bed Bath & Beyond, I pretty much went in there and went crazy with the laser gun, and she was like, all right, throw on a set of pillowcases and I'm good.
All right, cool. I was just getting our levels. I'm good to go.
Cool.
All right. And it's a Mossholder, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Just like the plant.
So, like a holder of the moss.
So there's some interesting debate about this online. I found 2 very different accounts of where the name Mossholder comes from. So one account is the ancient High German word for maple tree is Mazalter, Mazalter.
Mm-hmm.
And that Mossholder is a sort of anglicization of that. And one of those Ellis Island type things, maybe.
Yeah, because when they came over, they didn't exactly know how to spell, and so there was somebody else annotating that stuff, right? That's how that...
Sure.
Yeah. It's funny because my father-in-law got us all, not the 23andMe, but...
like Ancestry?
Yeah, Ancestry, that one. And so, okay, so here's a little story. I'm black and white, right? And so my dad's side from Alabama... and they say that most of the black Americans, the African Americans, can't trace their roots back past slavery because slaves didn't know how to write. We didn't know how to read. And so that's kind of common knowledge, right?
Right.
So when Facebook came out, I looked up Skanes. My dad's last name is Skanes, Skanes. And so when Facebook came out, for years, I'd kind of tap in to see who's out there. And it's a lot of white people, a lot of white people. And then there's like my family. Like I can tell it's my family because they're all still in they're in the South. It's not
right.
like they're shotgunned across America. They're in the South, there's very few of them. So when Ancestry came around, I got my result back. I'll read it to you right now. It is 28% Cameroon and Congo, 20% Irish, Scottish, and Wales, and then 19% Jewish. Right?
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, and on those sites, once you get your stuff back, there's a ton of people who are super into this. So I looked up the last name Skanes, and it turns out that there was a plantation in Alabama before the Civil War, the Skanes plantation, and then I started tracing that back, and that family, similar, right? They went through Ellis Island, and they were potato farmers. We are Skanes, Skanes, but in Europe it was Skaenes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a switch there.
That continental spelling.
Yeah. Anyway.
That's interesting. I think there was a show where celebrities had the ability to go on, and they were doing basically exactly that, like really in-depth genealogies.
Yeah.
And I think it was Ben Affleck. And they ended up finding out that, like, you know, a couple of generations ago, like not that long ago, his lineage had been slaveholders. And I think he tried to, like, cover it up, and it kind of turned into a big deal. And
I heard that. That's right. I remember that.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, sometimes I think about that. I didn't know my grandfather very well. He passed away when I was maybe 4 years old, very, very young. And then my father's father passed away when I was very young as well. So there's not a whole lot of connection for me beyond my parents to where Mossholders or the so.
Yeah. My mom's side, so my mom was adopted, and so when she went to go find her real parents, or her real mom, she found her, I'd say, like, close to 20 years ago now. And she was super into lineage before, like, yeah, that's way before the internet. And so, like, she found that we traced back to Austria and these Jewish roots and whatnot, right? So when the DNA test came back, and it lined up with all that stuff that she had found. But a little story about her is that my mom's been begging me to meet her for however many years, except for that she has roots from the Ku Klux Klan. I'm like, there's zero chance. Like, I don't care. Yeah, I'm not going to go visit her and hang out in Florida. That's not what's going on. So
yeah, I can understand that for sure.
Anyway.
Well, I'll throw one last genealogy name story at you, right? So when I was, this is kind of military related. When I was finishing up the Naval Academy, it was right when Facebook became a thing. And then a few years after that, going into like 2008, 2009, they opened it up to the public. Kind of became more of like a worldwide social network.
Yeah.
And that was right around the same time where I had been tapped by the training wing in Pensacola to be one of 5 junior officers that were in a temporary TAD holding status, waiting to either class up or move on. They do this festival of 5 flags in Pensacola every year, and the 5 flags represent the 5 different countries that have flown their flag over Pensacola: the Spanish, the British, the French, the Confederacy, and the United States. And so it's sort of like a Chamber of Commerce thing. They get a king and a queen, and then they have like a, I don't know what they call them, like a prince or something, and a princess for each of the 5 flags. And I ended up carrying the American flag around, and it's almost sort of like a beauty pageant, but you go to like local businesses, restaurants, banks, retail locations, and they do these ceremonies sort of reenacting what it was like to do like the first landing or whatever in Pensacola.
Yeah.
The Navy gets involved, and they throw a big party at the end.
Yeah.
Well, one of the events during the day was for us all to go out right around lunch in Alabama, because Pensacola is right against the border there. And this is on the little barrier island known as Perdido that kind of separates the intercoastal waterway from the ocean. And beautiful little beach bar, you know, all kind of wood and you know, kind of filthy the way beach bars are, but in a charming way.
Okay.
And one of the rooms, the entire ceiling was lined with women's bras that had been stapled up there.
Okay.
And their distinctive drink was, the best way to describe it, it's like a Wendy's cocktail full of 151. So it's like a chocolate frosty that they load up with rum, and they put a little rum on top. So we'd been drinking a few of these things. We were in our summer whites, you know, a bunch of officer, you know, 01s, 02s sitting there getting drunk in the day.
Yeah.
In public. And a couple of the bras found their way down and sort of, you know, took a couple of pictures. Ha ha ha, wouldn't this be funny? Well, so I put them on Facebook, as one does when one's a 20-something not making the best life choices.
Of course.
And tag myself in them, right? Because that's what one does. And what I neglected to properly, I guess, screen was whether I was tagging myself, Tim Mossholder, or the youth minister and pastor on the West Coast, who I've never met, whose name is Tim Mossholder.
Yes.
Who I happen to be Facebook friends with, because wouldn't it be funny if Tim Mossholder was friends with Tim Mossholder on Facebook? And he sent me an email the next day and said, "Hi, good afternoon. Please go ahead and undo that."
Oh, yes.
So.
Well, because that's about the same time that I started using Facebook, like 2009. And we were in Korea. And my buddy, again, you know, I grew up around MySpace. And even before that, I grew up without internet and shit like that. So my buddy reaches out to me. Hey, Bobby, I'm so glad to see you. How is everything going? Because, you know, I'd been gone for 10 years. I go, hey, man, it's good to hear from you. And then I started just, like, kind of laying into him, like, you know, it's kind of sad to see that you don't have a job yet. You know, we've been out of high school for almost 10 years now. Like, you really should get your life together. And I didn't know. I thought I was writing directly to him, but I was putting it on the wall.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So like he replies, he's like, wow, like you really just gonna call me out like that, but I guess it's all valid. So, I know it's out of love. Yeah.
Did it work? Did you guys life together?
No.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. Those are the challenges of not growing up around technology and then kind of trying to learn it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't say this keeps me up at night, but I often wonder to myself, what technology will I fail to grasp that my arrogant 11 or 12-year-old is going to snatch out of my hands and say, all right, Dad, just give it to me.
Oh, yeah. It'll happen.
It's going to be something. However engaged I intend to remain.
It's going to happen. My wife's already getting there, and she's younger than I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny, and this is maybe a good segue. It's sort of relevant to veterans getting out of the military, right? And you look around and you're like, oh man, I got this thing. And I remember some of the personnel record software we were using was like Windows 97. This is like 2011, right? So this is not like back in the day. I remember opening up programs and it would say like copyright 1998.
Yeah.
Okay, come on. And then you hit the civilian sphere and they're like, oh yeah, we just got the latest update from Oracle this morning, or Salesforce just sent us a new patch. And you're like, what now?
Yeah. 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 Except for in aerospace, it's still like backdated, believe it or not. Yeah. Okay. So we are good to go. Cool beans. So Tim, I want to first and foremost say congratulations for getting married, man. Welcome to the club.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it was a heck of an adventure.
So, like, right before we go into anything, what are some of the lessons learned of your wedding? What would you tell somebody not to do?
Well, I think don't make decisions quickly. So leave yourself plenty of time to make a plan and then say, you know what? We've both slept on this for a week and we don't really like it anymore.
Yeah.
And I think the more you kind of set your feet in concrete, the less fun you're going to end up having at the end of the day.
Yeah. We learned to not let a hookup do your DJ portion of the wedding. Like, a friend's like, oh man, I know a friend. Like, they'll do it. And it was the worst DJ by far. But
that's a good point. And we went with a pro, and it was one of the best decisions we could have made. And we were debating an iPod and doing a playlist and just letting it run. Yeah. And there's a couple of things that I didn't think of. And quite honestly, the wedding planning forums on Reddit that's all you need. Reddit.com/wedding planning. You're done. You got all your resources in one spot. But that one of the recommendations from a DJ was, hey, here's why you should hire people like me. And it was basically like, A, I'm going to be beholden to like doing a good job because you can Yelp me out of existence. Yeah. B, I know how to make your grandmother dance, and we're not worried about your 24-year-old friends. Yeah. Right? All the music was like properly kind of the right version you want to play at your wedding. Yeah. And the dude set up this cool projector, and we did a backyard wedding right on Lake Erie facing the lake. So we had a big white tent, a 60 by 30, and he projected the music video for all the music he was playing.
Oh, that's kind of pimp.
On the inside roof. And at first we were sort of like, yeah, I don't know. That might kind of look like a kid's birthday. But by the time like we got to like, the dance floor was open and all the rigmarole was over. Yeah. It was clutch. It was like, it looked really good and people had a really good time.
Oh, that sounds pimp. Yeah, that's my lesson learned. Good DJ.
And you know what? When you pay them, like you'll be so glad to spend that money versus having to worry about like your cousin making the playlist and it's nothing like what your wife asked for, and then you've got to have that fight. So
yeah. The second one would be, for me, I wish we would have got a videographer. Because I tried to get my wife to get on board with me and say, don't invite anybody if we haven't spent time together as a couple with them, right? Which would have drastically dropped the number down. And we didn't get a chance to go say hi to everybody. That's how many people were there. I mean, people want to take pictures, people want to eat and, talk to you. You don't get around to all those people. Small and intimate. I wish that would be my like note to self if I can go back in time. A much smaller wedding. Yeah. Anyway, secondly, thanks for coming on You're the Vet.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I love doing this.
Yeah, we shared time on your podcast, and I had a good time. We had a good conversation even before then, so I know that today's going to be a good conversation. I have no fear about that. So yeah, thanks for joining. Congratulations on the wedding, and Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the world who pre-Navy Tim is?
Sure. Stop me if this sounds a little too much Tale of Two Cities, but my parents had me when they were finishing up college. They were going to the University of New Mexico, and my dad was finishing up a mechanical engineering degree. And after they graduated, I was 6 months old, and we ended up in Southern California, where he got a job at JPL and got some work actually working on the Hubble Space Telescope before that got launched.
Yeah. And
he bounced around through some different private sector jobs, did a couple contracts kind of during the Bush era. Everything from like robotic vision systems and radial keratotomy machines all the way to like gunite pumps that spray concrete on the underside of overpasses.
Okay.
And my parents were starting to think about prospects for high school. So when I was 12 years old, we picked up the family. My mom's originally from Long Island, New York. She grew up in Cold Spring Harbor. So we moved out to Long Island, right about halfway out on the North Shore, a little town called Issaquah. And that's where they still live. They've been there now for 20-something years.
Nice.
I went through high school there. Actually, let me back up. So it's kind of an important moment. My mom, her uncle was a captain in the Navy in the medical side of things. And he specialized in substance abuse and clinical counseling for, at first, military members, and then in private practice for civilians that were struggling with their issues in terms of mostly alcoholism, but also, other chemical dependence.
Yeah.
His, daughter got married when I was 13. So we'd been on the East Coast for a year. And that actually took place in Portsmouth, Virginia, just kind of right around the corner from where I am right now. And the best man at that wedding was an F-14 instructor pilot. He was a lieutenant. And at the time, like every 13-year-old in the mid-90s, I'd seen Top Gun and had pretty much decided what I was going to do for a living. And he kind of sat me down and I said, all right, so I want to fly jets. I think that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in the world. What do I do? And I got sort of like a career trajectory brief from a Navy lieutenant as a young teenager. And what he kind of said to me was, there's a lot of different ways to go into the military. Informed me that the Navy flies the majority of the tactical jet aircraft in the military, which I don't know if they ever actually say in Top Gun. I mean, they probably did, that it's, the Navy. But I've met a lot of people who weren't in the military who said, oh, yeah, that movie about the Air Force on boats. So I kind of made up my mind that I wanted to be a Navy pilot. And then we talked about the different ways that you could become an officer. And he said, well, you can go to normal college, drink beer, hang out with girls. And then afterwards, you go get commissioned. It's this thing called ROTC.
Yeah.
He said, you got to sometimes pay for your college or part of it. OCS, different route. He said that's a little bit more, after you get out of school and you've already got that degree, if you want to go into the military, it's an option. He said that's pretty much all you on the college. And then he said, there's this other thing over here called the Naval Academy, and that's going to be a little bit more of an imposition on your time and your freedom, but they'll pay for your degree, and there's some advantages to go in there. And being, your typical overachiever, I said, well, that's it. That's where I'll go to college.
The typical overachiever, by the way.
So at 13 years old, I'd selected my career track, my service branch, my designator, and my commissioning source.
That's crazy. Were you always like that as a kid?
Kind of. I would tell you that I got nobody to thank but my mother. I mean, she really pushed me hard when I was younger. And to be totally blunt, getting through my Eagle Scout project when I was a senior was a big byproduct of her mentorship and I won't say she was like a taskmaster, but she helped me understand the process of setting goals and then reverse engineering critical milestones from those goals.
Yeah.
And that was probably one of the biggest lessons that I picked up in high school that, I'll just scream that lesson from the mountaintop for the rest of my career because I think it's kind of the secret to getting stuff done. So kind of fast forward through high school, I was on the swim team, running track, just kind of your typical endurance sports. I am functionally useless if you ask me to throw anything overhand, so okay with a frisbee. Could skip a hell of a rock across a pond, but that's about it. So I didn't get recruited or anything like that. I had pretty good grades, but I wasn't in the any kind of hyper accelerated courses. And I think for me the big X factor of actually getting into the academy was I went to the summer seminar program after I finished my junior year of high school, going into my senior.
Yeah.
And kind of went into that with the mentality that, hey, this is how you get into the Naval Academy is you come and you do these things and you look like the number one dude in whatever observational unit you are. And, everybody's like, oh, it's sort of like, just to test it out. And I was like, no, like they're going to gonna see you, right?
Yeah.
Your name's on a list somewhere.
They're scouting you.
Right.
Yeah.
So I went in there with a full head of steam. Had my parents dropped me off. I think it's like a week long. They dropped me off on like a Sunday, and then they picked me up on the Saturday. They're like, "Well, what do you think? You still into it?" And I was like 100 times more. I can't wait. This is the only thing I want to do. And that's just the most annoying 6-hour car ride, just chattering back to my mom and dad on the way back to Long Island that day.
Nice.
So I, you walk out of there having already completed one observational fit rep that they stick in your application when you put your package in. So that was good.
Yeah.
I ended up getting good marks from that guy. And in the fall, after that, to do like a weekend long walk along with one of the sophomores there. So that guy kind of walked me through and got to sleep on the floor in his room with his 2 roommates. And we went to a basketball game and we ate pizza down in the cafe area in the middle of Bancroft Hall. And, I got to kind of to see what a day in the life of an academic day. It was a Friday, but it was a day. And really got an appreciation at that point for like, okay, hey, this is what it's like to come to this place. And the contrast between all the yelling and screaming that we'd done in the summer and a normal academic day was just stark.
Yeah.
And it was like very reassuring, It's like, oh, wow, they don't like punch you in the face when you get something wrong. They just like tell you to go fix it, right? And you make a note in your pocket and then you move on with your life.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like set in stone at that point. So I got my application in really early. That was basically all taken care of from the actual applying to the school side of things.
To get accepted to the Naval Academy, I know because I'm at West Point right now, interning here for the summer, you have to get your congressman. Is that right? Is that the same as at the Naval Academy? Yeah,
that's any of the 5 academies. So Coast Guard, Merchant Marine, and then Army, Navy, Air Force.
The Merchant Marines have an academy?
Yeah, Kings Point on Long Island.
I had no idea.
Very small school, and you can commission into the Merchant Marine. You can take a reserve commission. You can go into any of the other branches if they've got a slot for you.
How do we, as Marines, not have our own academy if the Merchant Marines have it?
Well, you get about 200 or 150 or so Marines out of the Naval Academy because they're in the Department of the Navy.
No, I get that. I want my own school.
I get TBS.
Anyway. All right. Anyway.
So I got my application in uber early. I consider this a funny story. So I got you apply to the college, right? You send the writing sample and the SATs and all this jazz, and you fill out the little Scantron thing and whatever. And then I went out during the summer to go check out the Air Force Academy. And my dad's family's from the Denver area, so we got to see some family, sit around, play guitar for a while with my uncles, and then go check out the Air Force Academy, do the whole tour and everything. Beautiful place. Could totally have seen myself taking advantage of that, but the day we got back, we drove in the driveway. And my parents have sort of a long gravel driveway, so my mom would always kick me out at the end, go grab the mail, pull in the trash cans, and then she'd go park and then walk down the driveway.
Yeah.
So she's like, all right, get the mail. I jumped out. There was a letter from the Naval Academy, what they call a letter of assurance, saying, hey, pending the nomination, pending the physical screening, pending, you not breaking your leg in the next 6 months, you got into the Naval Academy, right? We want you at the school. Now just go do the rest of that stuff. Walked down the driveway, reached in the car, grabbed the Air Force application, threw it in the trash. And my mom was like, what are you doing? I was like, we're good. So before I ever started my senior year of high school, I had that letter in my hand. So I rolled into high school, everybody else is like, oh my God, my college application. So I was like, whatever.
Yeah.
So that was a huge load off. I powered through my Eagle Scout project. And then at my Eagle Scout ceremony, my congressman showed up and gave me my nomination, which is kind of ironic because then a week later, I got a phone call at my house in the afternoon. And I was like, hello, is this Timothy Mossholder? And I was like, yeah, it's speaking. I was like, hi, please stand by for the senator. And I'm like, what? And then this female voice came on the phone. I was like, Timothy? And I was like, hello? And she's like, hi, this is Senator Hilary Clinton. How are you doing today? I was like,
shit, that's crazy.
I'm doing great, ma'am. How are you? Because she was the senator from New York at that time.
Yeah.
And so in that phone call, she offered me her appointment as well. So
that's
I guess
incredible.
I'm kind of famous, but
you should see if she still remembers you.
Well, it's ironic because there was a classmate of mine whose parents were quite wealthy, who were big campaign donors of hers that lived down the street.
Yeah.
So I can't help but wonder what strings were pulled. But either way, checked all the blocks, got into the academy.
That's incredible.
So I walked in the gates on, I think my I-Day was 2 or 3 days before our prom and a week before my high school graduation. So missed all that stuff. Went to I-Day instead. And the Marine gate guards asked me, as they were checking my driver's license, blue or green. I was like, what? They're like, blue or green. I was like, what do you mean? They're like, Navy or Marines. I was like, oh, Navy? What are you kidding me? Like, whatever, man. See ya.
But you never made Top Gun though.
No. So I actually ended up. I went through the program, got the Bachelor of Science degree in English. Had a great time there. I mean, in retrospect, I think like anybody, I wish I'd taken more advantage of the opportunities that were put in front of me.
Yeah, like what?
But so I think a lot of what like a typical college kid or somebody who's kind of immature for the phase of life they're in, I prioritized sort of I won't say meaningless, less valuable social interactions. Mm-hmm. So what I mean is there's a lot of structured ways to spend your free time at the Naval Academy.
Yeah.
That if you were like really there and you said, okay, I'm going to run some sort of algorithm to optimize the value that's on the table right now. Right.
Yeah.
Getting throw up drunk with your buddies when you're 21 out in town is not the way to do it. Right. That's great. And I don't want any of them, if they're listening, to feel like I don't value that time. But I could have gone to the international symposium where people from all around the world were, doing blah, 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 right? And it's like, well, 6 and 1, half dozen the other. And in retrospect, there's just so much that they have on offer because it's such like a hub for the military. It's so close to DC, it's a major East Coast city, so people from all around the world can get there very quickly. The sailing team, my grades were not doing great at the end of my junior year, so I quit the sailing team, and I think I missed out on a lot of great opportunities that I could have taken advantage of senior year if I had just, quite honestly, done more homework. So whatever, I skipped 7th grade in the move from California to Long Island. I basically walked in the first day of 7th grade. They handed me my textbooks, and I said, done it, did half of it, done it, right?
Yeah.
So the second week of 7th grade, I jumped up to 8th. And so that kind of put me in the youngest. I think I was like the second or third youngest person in my class at the Naval Academy. So
that's crazy.
Yeah. So, in retrospect, a year at NAPS or, going out to the fleet for a couple of years might have done me some good.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm here at West Point, and so I've been learning how the structure is here within the academic schedule. And then I'm learning all of, like, for instance, they offer the cadets speed reading courses and, organizational skills. We just had a new instructor training today for test prep taking. But, I mean, they go through the whole process of teaching these cadets, like, legitimately how to be some of the best organized, forward-thinking individuals. And so I was just walking my car one day. I was like, I want my son to come here. And I was thinking, I wonder if the structure is similar to the Naval Academy, because if it is, then I actually want him to go there so he can be a Marine. Anyway.
Well, so that's funny, right? So I've got a copy of my transcript here right now. I don't know why I thought this might be relevant, but I've got it. And what I was looking at today is all of the things that if you went to college to get a Bachelor of Arts in English at a civilian school, that if you saw this transcript, you'd be like, what in the world is this?
Yeah, yeah.
So, Calc 1 through 3, probs and stats, leadership and human behavior, all kinds of stuff about military, like navigation is on here.
Yeah.
Naval history, thermodynamics, electrical engineering.
It's super crazy. And I'm very impressed. Like, I'm glad I got to experience being here because I have a newfound super duper respect for those who have gone through the academies because it's intense. It's intense. It's not like you went to Colorado State University and then, messed around for, 4 years and then commissioned, like these guys are some of the most, everybody here has gotten the approval from their congresswoman or their senator, right? Even up to presidential. And then, every one of them was essentially the best student in their area. And they all come here and realize like, oh shit, I'm just a small fish in a big pond.
Yeah.
And they're all crazy competitive. It's an intense environment. And, I'm honored to have gotten the opportunity to be here for the summer. And yeah. So anyway, so I kind of get a little taste of what you went through for that time that you were there. So, that says a lot about who you are and the kind of structure, and then the background that you say that you have from your mother, and then your father even going that engineering route. So you have structure in your life. When you were in with your English degree, what were you doing?
Yeah, so I got commissioned as a naval flight officer, and I accepted one of the first report dates down to Pensacola to start flight school.
Of course you did.
So so there, that was the conversation, right? Do you want to spend, 6 months in Annapolis doing a TAD job waiting for a November, December, January class date?
Yeah.
Which might have been really beneficial. And if I had, there were a lot of guys that did a graduate program, and not a lot of guys. There were a few that did a program that overlapped with their last year or so. So that 6 months could have been critical, finish your thesis or whatever. I was not that guy.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to sit around for 6 months and, drink beer and PT, might as well do it in Florida, right?
Yeah.
So I went down there. They put me into the holding pool. There ended up being about exactly a 6 month backup. So I got a job at the Naval Flight Museum down there. They've got this big aviation museum, ton of static displays, big theater.
Yeah.
It's really cool. If you're into aviation and you've not been there, it's a milestone. And they had a flight simulator, 2 little F-18 cockpits plugged into, literally, I think, Microsoft Flight Simulator with a big projection screen behind it. And you could go through there, and they built out some programs where you could do carrier landings, you could do catapult shots, or you could just cruise around. There was a turn the weapons on mode. And so they gave us used flight suits and a set of boots and sent us in there to teach middle school and high school kids that would come on field trips.
Yeah.
So, we'd have a shift schedule, couple hours in the afternoon, couple hours in the morning. You got to go check in, do the thing at the doctor, but pretty easy life.
Yeah.
So I got really into beach fishing and spent a lot of time PTing, kind of an obsessive amount.
Yeah.
And then classed up in the winter, went through the 6-week, aviation pre-flight in-doc ground school, flight rules and regulations. There's a weather piece. There's a engine systems piece. You kind of learn what the basic vocabulary is of flight school and aviation. And then there was another wait to class up for primary. And then we jumped into primary and basically started doing simulators and all the kind of computer-based training to learn the T6 Texan II. That was a new plane at the time. It's a front seat, rear seat, glass cockpit, ejector seated turboprop. And this thing is it's a beast. They have since lowered all of the NATAPS limits on the aircraft, so you can't G it up quite the way you used to when I flew it. And I don't think you're allowed to rev it out as hard as you used to be able to, but I can neither confirm nor deny that I saw 500 on the airspeed indicator for that sucker once upon a time. And
that's incredible.
There's definitely a time when we were well above the structural limits for positive G's and kind of said, hey, let's just go ahead and not tell anyone about that.
Yeah,
that's
thing incredible.
Was like a Ferrari.
Wait, I have to know. So what does your body feel like?
Imagine if over the course of 2 to 5 seconds, your weight increased by, 6.5 times.
Jesus.
So there was a time when I had a pen in my hand and I was writing on the knee board. So for the carrier landing, carrier style landing, they call it the break. It's a visual pattern. You come in, you fly at 1,200 feet over the runway in the direction you're going to land. You fly, most of the length of the runway, and then you just rock the thing on its ear, rip the stick back, hang a UE, throw your gear down, throw your flaps down, and then do another 180 and come in and land. And so that initial high G turn at about 1,200 feet, that bleeds off all your speed. And so the whole idea is that you can have a really fast pattern over the carrier to get the planes in, but then you give them kind of the geometry to come in and land at their described landing speed. So I had this pen in my hand. I'm just taking notes, and the dude was like, ready, hit it, and just ripped it to the side. And the pen fell out of my hand, and it landed on a little ledge in between my feet, and the plane completely sideways. That pen was just glued to the floor. It didn't move, and I could just reach down and grab it.
Tim, I didn't think that this conversation was going this way. I can literally sit here and talk about this all day long.
Yeah, I'd say so. Any aviator who's going to flight school, if there's any option about planes, go to the place where they're going to put you in the T6. It's a blast.
Okay, so a couple more. I have to ask some of these questions. Who has pilots on the phone with them ever? Okay, so you move into this area where, like, you had never experienced adrenaline like that ever before. And then, like, the first time that you go through that, like, what was that like?
Well, let me say this, right? So adrenaline has a lot of different effects on the body, and I'll be specific as to the one that I felt when I was in flight school. So as far as, like, the physical sensations on the body, it's like the most hardcore roller coaster you've ever been on, like, on steroids.
Yeah, I bet.
But it's not wildly different than that. So if you go on, like, the newest, fastest, highest G, most, free suspended, hanging from just, your pinky toe roller coaster, it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
The adrenaline that I felt, and this is where I think a lot of people realize that aviation is not for them. It's the headspace you have to be in order to do what you need to do successfully on time.
Yeah.
And the real, I think, like, learning curve for me, and I was in the NFO training program. So the first 6 flights, they put you in the front cockpit and they let you just, all right, why don't we go have a little fun and do some aerobatics and you can fly. Did a couple landings, night landings at an airfield. And then they stick you in the back and you start jumping on the instruments and you're kind of in more of like a flight planning mode. And not to denigrate pilots, but, like, the NFO is the one who's calling the shots. And they've got the clock hack, right? So they're keeping time down to the second. Mm-hmm. They've got the picture in terms of what's happening on the radar systems. They're usually on the radios, although single seaters sitting there like, I could do that.
Yeah.
You just get that extra set of neurons in the cockpit with you to do all of the kind of the work. And then the pilot can really be just spot on with their air work, and they can fly the plane exactly right. And that's where that crew backup comes in. So as an NFO, you're sitting there and a lot of your flights, what you're essentially trying to do is find waypoints on the ground and correlate that back to what you planned on the map. Mm-hmm. And so if you've got a chart and you say, okay, hey, I know this river kind of looks like Mickey Mouse, and then this one over here kind of looks like the Don't Tread on Me snake, and then you got that church that's got a big flat white metal roof, Mm-hmm. So you're really trying to look out of the aircraft and figure out, like, hey, man, we're going real fast, and this stuff's flying by me at 240, 360 knots,
500.
So, 360 knots, right? If you divide by 60, you get 6. So 6 miles a minute. So that amount of stress, and then you're evaluated down to the second, right? So many of these evolutions, you had to fly over a spot in the ground where your instructor pilot's looking out the window, and he looks at the clock and says, all right, we're 4 seconds late. Good job, right? 30 seconds, you get top marks. Outside 30 seconds, you fail the flight. Mm-hmm. And then you go to this phase where, hey, not only are we, starting the clock at the first waypoint of the route and making sure that we can get there on time, we're starting like the real world clock and say, hey, you got to fly over that church at, 12:01 and 32 seconds, real time. And then you got to plan all the way back to, hey, this is when we this is when we show up at the squadron. This is when we start the brief. This is when we walk to the airplane. This is when we're going to take off. And every single milestone needs to be planned out, like, within 30 seconds if you want to get a good grade.
Yeah. Okay. I have one more question about aeronautics.
Yeah.
Okay. Back in, like, World War II, there could be 200 planes in the sky shooting at each other. And then there's this whole war in the sky. Can that happen today? I mean, that can't happen today. We can't have...
like a massive air battle?
We can't... That's impossible, right?
Well, I think you and I could sit here, we could invent a scenario where it is. I'll just say this. I'm not aware of current TTPs that would address that contingency in the active duty.
I spent a little time in Estonia installing the system over there, and the Estonian Air Force used to say that every so often the Russian planes would come over just to say, like, oh, hey, we're in your airspace, and we can be. And they'd say, like, happy birthday and shit like that.
Yeah.
Like, it was never a threat, but they would always have to get in the planes and chase them out and stuff like that. And I'd always thought, do people go in the sky and, have battles in the sky still? Like, is that a thing?
Well, so air combat maneuvering, ACM, or what we might call dogfighting, is absolutely a core competency of pilot training still. And the ability, so the big trick here, right, is like your sensors have certain capabilities. And certain sensors work great really far out, and they just don't work at all inside a certain range. Certain sensors, work at a nice medium range, and there's a variety, any aircraft or any combat systems platform is going to have things it does well and things it doesn't do well. And there's not, as far as, again, as I'm aware, as a SWO who's been out of the Navy for 6 years, there's not a great sensors package for when you and another plane are close enough to like see each other, and where your eyes and your like you said, sort of the way the body feels in the aircraft aren't like valuable resources for maneuvering your aircraft, right?
Yeah.
So being able to see something, that's where the vision comes in, right? You see something on the horizon, you say, whoa, what is that? That's not on my medium range radar system, or that didn't come up on my IFF, interrogator to see that there's another friendly aircraft in the sky with me. And so being able to use that final set of sensors, right, your eyeballs, that's where that still has to be a core competency of flyers. And it's whether you intend to get behind an enemy aircraft and shoot them with your machine gun, or you need to find a carrier on a horizon at twilight, and there's that big, thick band of sun reflection, and it's like, where in the world is it? And your radar's out, and you're coming in on one engine with no gas, So there's all these contingencies where you still have to be really, really good at the flying part, right? So they're always going to practice that.
That's incredible. Man, I'm in awe. That's probably the best word to use for the state I'm in right now. But
that's awesome. I didn't even get my wings.
Who cares, man? I mean, literally to fly one, there's a simulator in LA, and I'd purchased a Groupon for it, and then I went on to the website. It's like, I'm 2 inches too tall, apparently. I didn't know there were height restrictions, but it absolutely makes sense. Anyway, long story short, I absolutely wanted to try one, because there is a little piece of me that is an adrenaline junkie. Yeah.
Well, hey, get the CEO of the Blue Angels on the podcast and see if he'll give you a backseat ride.
Oh, man. You just gave me an idea. I'll do that.
Yeah, Blue Angels, Thunderbirds.
Yeah. Okay, so you spent 6 years in. You didn't get your flight wings. What did you do, and how did you know you wanted to get out?
Yeah, that's it. So there's kind of a longer answer here, unfortunately. So the first thing I'll say is when I was the summer after my freshman year at the Naval Academy, I was on a summer cruise on a yard patrol craft doing just a little bit of ship handling training. I got this real bad eye infection, what I thought was an eye infection. The corpsman on board treated it with an antibiotic cream, and when I pulled into Newport, Rhode Island, which is, the surface warfare school, and there's a clinic up there, I went to the doctor, and they said, hey, this isn't an infection. What this is an acute inflammation in the space between your lens and the front of your eye. So that little sack full of fluid right there, got a little bit of inflammation, so take the steroid drop, it'll go away. And it did. Fast forward to my junior year, I'm going through my pre-commissioning physicals to earn my commission, and they're going to say, hey, you got this, that, and the other thing wrong with you, so here's the things you can and can't do. And it came up that I'd had this condition in my record. It was well documented because I got treated at the Naval Academy.
Oh, no.
And they basically said, hey, you know what? Like, this is fine, but we have to put a waiver in place before we commission you. Mm-hmm. It's totally okay. No worries. Great. So I go into the aviation community. Everything's hunky-dory. And then during, I guess it was like the summer 2007, I had another inflammatory incident. And that's kind of a question mark, right? Because if you continue to have these auto-inflammatory incidents, well, maybe there's an underlying condition here that should be investigated.
Yeah.
So I went to the flight surgeon, as was SOP. And he said, all right, hey, yep, go down to medical, get the drops. He said, you know what, I'll go get them for you. So he went down there, got the drops for me, gave me the prescription shit and all that jazz. I took, I think, like 2 weeks or 3 weeks out of the jet just to go through the drop cycle, and then went back to flying and continued going. And that was intermediate, so I had another year or so. And then I went in, I guess that was probably in the summer. So I guess I went in the beginning of December 2nd. Ask me why I remember that so acutely. I went in, I did my annual flight physical. So what we have to do is every year in the beginning of your birth month, you have to go in and get, rechecked and make sure that there's nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And I went through everything, passed through every conversation with flying colors, and the final step is you go and you sit on the butcher paper, and the doctor, the MD, comes in and writes. And this commander walked in the room. She was like, all right, everything looked really good with your hearing test. Your blood work came back totally fine. That's great. Your PHA is perfect. And here's your down chit. I'm sorry, ma'am. What did you say? And she said, yeah, here's your down chit. You've had 2 recurrences of uveitis documented in your record. That invalidates your waiver, and you need to take this back to your flight surgeon and have him disenroll you from training.
Oh, no.
Okay. And so later found out that I guess he hadn't necessarily taken all of the prerequisite steps to report that incidence of uveitis through his channels. And he'd kind of say, hey, take these drops and we'll get you back in the plane. and I got caught. And I wasn't aware of it at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
You were
no attempt for me to cover it up. But
you were
just,
Flojo.
Yeah.
You're just taking what your dog. Oh, that's insane.
So I went back to flight school, and I had a Marine Lieutenant Colonel for a CO and a Navy Commander for an XO, and they both looked at me like I was trying to pull a fast one on them because I was 7 flights away from winging.
Fuck, man, that's crazy. That sucks. I mean, I can absolutely empathize with that. So I actually know how disheartening that is. But so how did you take it, and what happened from there?
Well, yeah, so they just enrolled me from training. They stuck me, and this was actually kind of fun. I made some good friends here. I ended up with a couple other guys running the PRT program, so they wouldn't let folks start flight school if they couldn't pass the PRT or get, good medium or whatever.
Yeah.
So I ended up running that for about 6 months while I was waiting for the probationary officer continuation board to basically come back and say, hey, you can redesignate to a new community or you're going to get out. And so I'd had to do like a whole, letters of recommendation, put together my transcript and my package and everything. And I had to submit a letter to the board requesting like what service assignment I wanted, if not naval flight. And I think I always try to recreate this in my head. I don't know if I get it right. I think I'd listed it like public affairs officer, JAG. I think I'd put like submarines or something.
Yeah.
And then I put like supply corps. And like Marine Corps for some crazy reason. So you're like, hey, throw me in green. Let's see if that happens.
Yeah.
So at that time, I had a couple of people that I knew that were in this redesignation. I think one had been another medical, and there had been a couple of folks that had not been able to get over air sickness. And so that can get you disenrolled as well if you puke every single time. And so we all got swell, every single one of us. They got sent surface warfare. So I gotta share this story because it's kind of funny. So I got a phone call from my detailer. I was walking into the shopping mall one afternoon. And he was like, hey, Lieutenant Mossholder, this is so-and-so. And I forget the guy's name. He's like, hey, I got to detail you. I heard you got SWO. I don't have any billets that I can send you to right now, so I'm just going to send you to a ship. And you're just going to kind of fill in. And the next time there's a formal role opens up, you can jump into that, and your CO will give you something to do in the meantime. I was like, oh, that sounds great. He's like, so I can pretty much send you wherever. You're down in Florida right now. Where do you want to go and what kind of ship do you want to be on? And I'd had some friends who had told me once upon a time that DDGs were good ships because they'd been built wider than cruisers.
Uh-huh.
So cruisers are a little top heavy, tend to rock and roll a little bit. And having been on cruisers, I can attest they're like very much more top heavy.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, let me just avoid any kind of nonsense and go to a nice big flat bottom. DDG, they're newer, they're nicer. Yeah. A little bit smaller crew, so it's a little bit different vibe. So I said, well, I want a destroyer. He's like, all right, cool, man. You got, Norfolk, Jacksonville. You can go to San Diego, Washington, Pearl Harbor. I got, slots out in Japan. And at the time, I was in a relationship with somebody who was in the Annapolis area. And I was like, oh, cool. Well, Norfolk's right by Annapolis. Let me go there. And you tell that story to a guy who's in the Navy, and they're like, wait, you could have chosen any fleet concentration area and you went to Norfolk? It's like, are you okay?
He was in love.
I don't want to go to Hawaii. No, by all means, send me to the Mid-Atlantic. So I showed up. I checked on board USS Barry, DDG 52. Walked aboard, did it all wrong. Didn't know which way to salute, who to hand my paperwork to. Met my boss, and he said, "Hey, yeah, oh yeah, you, welcome aboard. Hey, man, kind of like, oh, what are you doing here?" And I guess the ship was in its pre-operational stand down, and half the crew was on leave because we were going on deployment in 10 days.
Yeah.
So I threw my stuff in a stateroom. He wrote me a leave chit for 9.5 days. I came back. I didn't realize you weren't allowed to park your car in the parking lot, so I just parked my car in the parking lot, blocked it, walked away for 7 months. That's we came back from deployment. The thing started on the first try. I checked on board, didn't have a job, didn't know what I was up to. They put me in charge of anti-terrorism force protection, which is a good made-up job for a ship going on deployment out of country.
Yeah.
And we went across the pond. We hit the Azores for a couple of hours just to get some gas. That was pretty beautiful. And then pulled into Portsmouth in England. We hit Portsmouth, got a day off on leave to go up to London, spent the night in London, came back. We got back underway. Basically, cruised around doing exercises. We pulled into Lisbon, Portugal for a few days, hit Italy a couple of times. We were in the port of Rome for Christmas and this was in 2008, so late 2008. Russia had just recently invaded large portions of Georgia and had flown strike missions to sink a lot of their fleet. So you were mentioning about like the stories of the Russian pilots flying by each other and whatnot and sort of puffing their chest out. We had a Russian basically spy ship. It was kind of dressed up to look like a fishing vessel, but like what fishing vessel has a Connex box full of antennas sticking out of it, like literally bolted to the back of it. So they followed us around and we stuck our anti-submarine sonar tail out. We got a mile-long tail that's covered in hydrophones, so we use that to passively detect undersea, craft.
Yeah.
So, a little bit of muscling each other, but, you drive by them and you're standing on the bridge with binoculars, you just wave, they wave back, or whatever. That deployment, if you cut the transatlantic journeys off and only count the time when we were in theater, we had more Liberty days in port than we were underway.
Good thing you picked the post.
Right? So, I mean, maybe I didn't end up in Hawaii, but I got, I won't say I had the best deployment you can have in the Navy, but I had a really good deployment.
Yeah. So is that what you finished up doing?
Yeah. So let me tell you how I got out of the Navy, because it only took me like 38 minutes to get here.
You're good.
So I'm doing the SWO thing. Life's great. Quite honestly, like looking back on it, I had no intention of getting out of the military. In fact, I had negotiated my next set of orders to go to Japan to be the training officer on the USS John S. McCain, DD-56. So I was fully ready to do that forward deploy thing. And those destroyers basically, like their default state is underway, and they only come in for like temporary maintenance and stuff. So like they don't sit at the pier for 5 weeks where you're going to work essentially at a floating office. Like they're out. And so that was my goal, is to go to sea and like really go to sea.
Yeah.
And I'd been having some low back pain, and it kind of been bothering me. I thought I'd like hurt myself because we'd work out underway on the ship, and you're doing like a deadlift with a bicep bar or something. It's not the best, and the ship rocks and you kind of tweak something. So I didn't know what was going on. And I'd had a really bad recurrence of the uveitis, like so bad that I was sort of locked in my room with an eye patch and couldn't go out in the daylight and stuff. And I had to come off the watch bill. I couldn't stand deck watch anymore. So that was kind of bad. And the back thing was kind of bad. And I went into the doctor and I said, let me just make sure this isn't a problem before I go to Japan and I'm underway all the time. And there's just no chance that I'm going to get like good, thorough first world, East Coast, 3.5 hours south of DC medical care, right? If this is really bad, I can go to Bethesda like overnight and whatever. So I go in, they're like, okay, well, we're going to do some blood tests. We'll stick you in the MRI tube, blah, blah, blah. And essentially the news that I got, so this is where we were. I was planning to get underway on deployment on Tuesday. It was Saturday morning. I had been on duty the previous Friday. When you're on duty on the ship, you don't get cell phone calls inside the ship, and you're not hanging out outside the ship. So I turned my cell phone on Saturday morning, walk into the parking lot, about to go enjoy my Saturday off. It's like 9 a.m. I got a voicemail. Hey, Tim, this is Dr. Holmes. Got the results of your MRI and your blood test back. Got your paperwork filled out for the med board. We're going to put that in. Need you to give me a call back. We're going to go ahead and process your paperwork right now and start to get you transferred to your lim due status.
That's what?
Okay. What is this all about? So that day, I had to turn right back around, go to the duty officer and say, hey, I got this voicemail. Called the XO, took the commensurate ass chewing for like, hey, sir, I'm not going to be one of your 3 officers of the deck for your translant in 96 hours.
Oh, no.
So I got pulled off the watch bill, a lot of bad blood there. And I literally transferred from that command in one day on Monday and checked into the temporary personnel unit in Norfolk. And I ended up assigned to the 2-star admiral that runs all of the surface fleet maintenance and training. So like when you pull into Norfolk and it's time for you to get it done, this is your 2-star admiral.
Yeah.
When you go out to sea and you're going to go on deployment, you got a 1-star. He lives on the carrier. So kind of operational admin chain of command.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing like destroyer fleet readiness stuff. There's a big 5-year inspection where it's reported to Congress every 5 years how the ship's managing its life cycle. They're supposed to last, 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
So that's a huge deal. That's like your top level stress X in terms of maintenance and training. So I would go out to the ships, a couple weeks beforehand and say, hey, what's going on? What do you got? Your stoplight chart's got some yellow on it. Where are we?
Yeah.
Kind of get the report from the XO, go back to my team and say, okay, hey, this is what, these guys need. And we'd put a plan together, go brief our 06, he'd brief the 08 and, good to go.
Yeah.
I did that for 18 months, ended up going through the whole limited duty process. At the time, the med board process was just beginning what they call the Integrated Disability Evaluation System pilot program. It's now the standard, and there's since been laws passed that actually like fix a huge loophole that was in place when I went through. So if you don't mind, I kind of want to hover on this because I think your audience might benefit from hearing this.
No, you're good.
So what used to happen is that if you got basically tagged as physically ineligible for military service, the Navy or the Army or whatever would process you and say, you're out, you're done, adds up. Then you walk your discharge paperwork and your medical record over to the VA and say, hi, I'm here for my benefits. Now, if that's anything that was like actually messing with your quality of life, that might be like the worst thing that could happen to you, right? Your pay's off, your health insurance is off, you're unemployed, you might be homeless if you lived on post, and now you got to go get a benefits claim with the VA, like good luck, right?
Yeah.
So what they figured out how to do was to basically run the medical evaluation process where the Navy decides whether they're going to retain or separate you, simultaneous to the process where the VA evaluates you and does your compensation physical.
Is that still current?
That is the way it works now. So nowadays, when you get tagged and they say, hey, you can no longer serve on the active duty because your Navy doctor has diagnosed this condition that's in your record, you don't end up on the street before you've got a rating.
Oh, I see. Okay,
so
I gotcha.
Your benefits hand off exactly when your term of service ends. So that if you end up on the retirement list, the TDLR or the PDLR, the temporary or permanent, that starts day one.
Yeah.
So I ended up going through the process. They evaluated me at 0% disability, which meant that my exacerbating conditions did not meet the standard for, like, I didn't, to be 60%, it said you had to be hospitalized for 6 weeks at a time and stuff. And that wasn't me.
Yeah.
So I rebutted it and I submitted, medical records proving that I was like locked in my stateroom for 4 days with the lights off, and they upped me to 20%, but I didn't get the retirement list. So I just got a severance check that, there's some math of how they calculate that. If you're high 3 or something.
Yeah.
And cut me a check. They took the tax out of it, and I got the difference. Now, the reason I hover on this, and that there's recently a law that was passed that there's a decision out there called the St. Clair ST.CLAIR. And the St. Clair decision, I don't know who this was, but some guy basically went to DFAS and said, hey, you've deducted income tax from money that is a severance benefit payment. And that's not income, not taxable, is like allotment or whatever.
Yeah.
And because of the internal process at DFAS at the time, DFAS can't discriminate against what is tax exempt and what's tax included. So what they were doing is they were just taking the tax out, and then you'd have to go and get an amended W-2 after the fact to refile your taxes. So it's a sizable amount, like $25,000.
What year did this start?
So I think this law got passed last year, where now if they issue you some sort of disability compensation, DFAS has been fixed, right? Their process internally. But, for anybody who's hanging out there where they say to themselves, wait, I paid income tax on my severance check.
Yeah.
The remedy to this is research the St. Clair decision. And then I literally every single day would dial DFAS Cleveland. I'd follow the little phone 235-823, whatever, to get to the right person. Yeah. To the point where every extension knew who I was.
Yeah.
They would play oh my God, it's this guy calling from 757 again, hot potato him over to billing or whatever.
Yeah.
But I eventually got somebody who reissued my W-2 with that amount of money not included in income. And so they moved it from one block to another block. And then I refiled my taxes for that year with a tax preparer, and I got a huge amount of money back. So I think people for the last 6 months are probably safe. This probably hasn't been a problem. And you're saying what is he talking about? It worked fine for me. If you were issued a severance check, and so the catch is the IRS will not give you that money back after 36 months.
Oh, well.
So if you got a severance check 34 months ago, you need to get hot, and get your money back.
Okay. That's shitty because, that happened to me in 2010.
Yeah.
Well, you got my hopes up. No, that's good information. And, is that I mean, I can Google it. CLAIRE?
I don't think there's an E on the end, but if you type in St. Clair decision DFAS separation money or something, you'll get it.
Okay. Well, I'll have those on the show notes for sure. So, yeah, thank you for that.
So I ended up on the street with a little bit of money in my pocket, no idea what I wanted to do, and for the previous 6 months before I signed my DD-214.
And the girlfriend was gone.
Yeah, at that point. So I was living in Virginia Beach. I was living on the north end, steps from the ocean. I thought, hey, this isn't bad. It's not great. It's kind of whatever. It's, I say Virginia Beach is sort of like the Huntington Beach of California, of the East Coast.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. There's some cool stuff to do, but it's not Hollywood. It's not San Diego.
Yeah. But I mean, during spring break, it gets crazy. Allegedly. So you got this decision that says, hey, you can't stay anymore. You went to go work for the 2-star. You did that for 18 months. And then, but at any of that time, were you actually preparing to get out?
Yeah.
Okay. So go ahead.
I heard, so I looked up, so what my specific condition was, I looked up what the med board was going to be bound to based on federal statutes. And I knew that there was no way I was going back to active duty.
Yeah.
And I had actually contacted the community managers for every other officer community in the Navy that wasn't obviously not I didn't call the guy for the SEALs, right?
Yeah.
Obviously. I didn't call the aviation guys back. Hey, what do you think?
Yeah.
I got sicker. But I contacted public affairs, for example. I was like, well, okay, hey, I wanted to do this once upon a time, English major, and they basically said, hey, if we can't send you to a carrier staff that's going to deploy, you can't ever have a career in public affairs because that's a major milestone.
Yeah.
So there was I think HR was the only community where I got a maybe, and I was sort of yeah, maybe not.
Yeah.
So I basically knew I was getting out, but what I wasn't aware of, and what kind of would have made a big difference at the time, is if I'd ended up on the retirement list, I don't know if I would have gone straight to work, right? So if I had consistent income, I might have been a bum for a little while.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure exactly what was going to happen, but I knew, I think, my time in the Navy's over, and I'd received some good mentorship from a guy who I think now is an admiral, but at the time was a captain, and what he had basically said to me was look, man, this is a crazy hard career track, right? Going to sea with the U.S. Navy as an officer is, it's like a joke. There's a couple thousand people that do this in the world, don't be too hard on yourself if it doesn't work out because you've got this thing that causes you significant pain.
Yeah.
So, made peace with that and started investigating business school.
Mm-hmm.
And I have an uncle who went to business school, has founded multiple companies. He's the CEO of a company that does data processing for medical science applications. If you need to run a huge data experiment on a massive amount of data, you get in touch with these guys and they work with you.
Yeah.
So cutting edge Bay Area, medical, biotech, blah, 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 MBA. I was like, all right, yeah, hey, what do I do? And he was like, don't go to business school. Oh, okay. He's like, yeah, so if you can't tell me today whether you want a finance program or an entrepreneurial program, or if you want to go and study sustainability or whatever it is, right? If you're just I want to go to business school so I can check the block, he's like, you're just throwing money into the wind.
Yeah.
He said, if you go work for a little while, and he recommended sales. And his recommendation was that if you can get as close to the revenue producers as possible, or to the people who save money for the company, conspicuously reduce overhead.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two areas where then you go to business school and you say, okay, I get the money piece. Now I can go lead companies from the top down, right?
Yeah.
So if you know how money gets made at companies because you've done it,
yeah,
or you know how money gets saved because you've done it,
yeah,
then you can go do all the others, right? Your accounting department is going to do accounting, right?
Yeah.
That leadership is more just management, right? But if your sales team is terrible and you don't have a sales background, what do you tell them?
Yeah.
So I didn't choose to investigate business school seriously and started talking to recruiting firms. And there was a reservist at the office that I was stashed at who actually was just transitioning and working for Orion. And one of my classmates that was actually in my company, so we lived next door to each other for 4 years.
Yeah.
She was working for Bradley Morris. Made the connection, started talking to both of those folks, and ultimately kind of made a decision that I wanted to focus more on my classmate, my friend that I knew from before.
Yeah.
Ended up over there. Went to a hiring conference January 23rd, 2012, and had an opportunity to talk to a bunch of companies. I talked to Pepsi, talked to a couple companies out on the West Coast, a couple on the East Coast, talked to a cool company called Greystone that sort of they're mostly military now at this point. I mean, I've seen so many people get hired there, and all their leadership comes from veterans.
Oh, you were being recruited by...
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so you were on the other side of the spectrum at this point.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I went to the event, and I now, having worked at Bradley Morris for 6 years, I get how those worked, right?
Yeah.
You meet this room full of candidates, and you say, we're going to go talk to that person because they seem sharp. Yeah. Not to toot my own horn, but like, that is how we hire. I know how that's how we hire, and I know that's how I got hired.
Yeah.
So I had a conversation with the guy who was the regional manager for officer operations at the time, Chris Williams. He's now our senior vice president of service.
Uh-huh.
And then I actually sat down and did a face-to-face interview with the guy who was the vice president of client services, but now is our CEO, Tim Bass. And it was a really different interview than the other interviews. He sat me down and said, all right, hey, cool it. You're sweating. Like, sit down, take your jacket off.
Yeah.
And he sort of, his question to me was, what do you want to do? And at the time, I mean, the real plan in the back of my head was, go get a job for a little while and then decide where I want to go to grad school. And a part of me was really seriously considering doing some night courses to get medical prereqs to go medical. And I was thinking either physician's assistant or MD.
Yeah.
And so I said, hey, quite honestly, like, I don't know where my head's going to be 4 o'clock every day if this is where I'm going to be putting some effort and some time. And he was like, okay, that's fine. Like, we'll consider that, right? That's not a deal stopper for us to talk.
Yeah.
And they needed a Naval Academy person to work this area and to focus on people like myself.
Yeah.
And so in that interview, my entire philosophy about my job search changed. And what I very quickly realized is that what I needed to screen for was not whether I'd been a consumer of that company's product or whether I'd seen their commercial on TV, but whether or not I felt like the people that were going to be my bosses were people that I would select for myself if I had like total autonomy to make that choice because I did,
Yeah.
And that was really unique because I'd not been able to do that in the military at all. You show up and they tell you who your supervisors are.
Yeah.
In this situation, I got a chance to meet somebody. I said, I think that however little confidence I have in my ability to be a full commission candidate recruiter, talking to these people, I get the sense that I can learn from them, that they will share value with me, and that I think I can return value to them. And that was more of like a gut feeling than it was, evaluating their balance sheet and realizing that they're 28% gross revenue. Like none of that, right?
Yeah.
If we're going to spend 40 to 80 hours a week together, this has got to be more than just a job description. Yeah.
Now, would you just say as a team or as a family? Like, if you had to lean towards one or the other.
What do you mean?
So you're saying, I'm going to spend 40 to 80 hours with these people. I want them to feel like a football team or, like the sailing team, right? Like the guys that you train and you sweat and bleed with, or like family where like, yeah, you sweat, bleed, and you're also breaking bread and their family and, you guys are hanging out on the weekends. Like, what way are you leaning towards at that point?
Well, we spent a lot of time and effort to try to make our culture very much like a special operations team. Okay. Our CEO, Tim, was a small bird flyer. He was a warrant in the Army. Yeah. So he flew for spec ops guys. And his mentality is like more of that sports team. But at the time, the company was really tiny. I mean, there was probably, less than 20 of us in the Norfolk area.
Yeah.
A small handful in Austin, small handful in Atlanta, where the corporate headquarters are. And we've just exploded in size since then.
Yeah.
So for me, my initial encounter with the company was kind of like that locker room environment. The guy I went to work for was a West Point football player. So he had that kind of team mentality. There were a couple other folks in there that were Army, a couple of, Air Force NCOs. So very much like joining a military unit. But for me, it was cool. It was like a joint tour, right? So I got Army over here. That guy's a Marine. And, these two dudes were in the Air Force.
Yeah.
That guy's been in, human resources and staffing for the last 28 years or whatever, so...
Oh, that's just Paul.
Right. Yeah, right. So there's a huge diversity of backgrounds, but everybody like inside of that, like the little Russian nesting dolls, right? The center doll for everybody was a veteran.
Yeah.
And so that to me was really important.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking the job, and after about 6 months, the guy that was managing the nuclear program for all the officers that had served on carriers and submarines got recalled to active duty because he'd been out for 2 years and had a 2-year deferral with the reserves to not deploy in that time. And that ended. And they sent him to a shore job in Norfolk. I believe he's still on the active duty. Sort of like daisy chained orders together to get his commission reactivated. But so he vacated that spot, and I ended up basically taking over. Well, it started, I took over half the nukes in the country, and then I eventually took over the whole program. And again, I'm alert to how cocky I may or may not sound here, but I had been working the East Coast nukes, and we had a gentleman that was working the West Coast, and he had decided to transition over to the account side and to work more with clients and be in sales than to do the candidate recruiting side. And we were talking about maybe hiring somebody, and we had somebody for a little while, and it wasn't the perfect fit. So there was sort of this half of this territory up for grabs. And I remember going into Tim's office, and he was sort of talking to me about what I wanted and where I saw myself going. And he basically said, well, look, we're still trying to find somebody to handle this other thing. So in the meanwhile, can you pick up the slack? And I remember thinking to myself, this is it. You got to say it right here. And I was like, I don't want to pick up the slack. I want this to be my job, and I want to do the whole thing.
Wow.
And it was sort of like the same throw-uppy feeling as when you like lean in to kiss a girl for the first time. It was the first time in my civilian career where I was like, I'm asking for like a promotion,
Yeah.
And so that put me in kind of direct contact with those folks just all around the globe. And I did that for about 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And that, involved everything from cold calling random lists that would get dropped on my desk, like, a big stack of resumes. Hey, here's some resumes, sort through them. Like, where'd you get these? I don't know. They came in the mail.
Wow.
So we were like literally like, you pick up the phone and you're like, look, I got 7 seconds before this person hangs up on me, and it's got to work, And I'm not charging anything, totally free. I'm going to write your resume for you. I'm going to give you negotiation advice. I'm going to connect you with all these great opportunities. But, people don't like to get sold to on their telephones. And so...
So you have 7 seconds. This is obviously tried and true. You guys have gone through the weeds and you know this, right? So how can you sell anything in 7 seconds?
You have to ask enough questions to find out what your customer actually wants.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest mistake it's certainly the biggest mistake that military officers make getting into sales. Is you find out what the sales pitch is, you memorize it like it's a mission brief, and then you try to say it with so much force into your handset that the person can't possibly react appropriately. And
okay.
I remember I'd come back from the gym, I'd be like listening to like Five Finger Death Punch in my headphones, and then I'd pick up the phone and try to dial like it was a jiu-jitsu match, and it's not effective.
Okay.
So you have to start by asking questions, right? So everybody has a problem.
Yeah.
Everybody has a problem. And if you're a veteran and you're within 18 months of getting out of the military, I know what your problem is.
Yeah. You ain't got no job.
Right.
Yeah.
You need exposure.
Yeah.
Where are you going to get exposure from?
Yeah.
Do you have a network of 10,000 companies that reliably hire veterans annually? I do,
Yeah.
So that was kind of the goal. And so I think if you can get to somebody and have them tell you what their problem is because you've asked them the right questions.
Yeah.
Perfect. I got a solution. Why don't you come to the Norfolk Hiring Conference in 6 weeks?
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, I can count on one hand the people that came and then expressed dismay that they'd done that. And I think I got a pretty good argument for why each of those, let's say 3-4 people would have been in some way unreasonable in what they were saying. I thought this was only going to be Fortune 100. Really? Did I tell you that?
Yeah.
So, like, I told you I only want to live in this zip code. It's like, well, okay, but this is 40 minutes away.
Yeah. Yeah. We had the conversation, and you don't know this story, but when I got out, I was in process of getting a divorce, and she's like, you need to drop my car off. She stayed back in Okinawa, and she's teaching out there. She's like, you need to drop my car off at my parents' house. I was like, well, like, how am I going to find a job? So, these were the thoughts that I was having, and I didn't have very much money on me at the time, and I think at this time I didn't have anything, and there was this beat up 1983 Mercedes-Benz that had been changed to a biodiesel sitting in this alleyway with a for sale sign, and I asked them how much it was. They said $300. And so I had to go like ask at the time he was an associate, and I had to ask a friend of mine for $300, and I told him, man, I'm good for it when I get a job. And he's like, okay, man, just, you're good for it. Anyway, this thing had like a hole in the seat, no AC, no radio, and I drove it from LA to San Diego twice for a Bradley Morris and Orion.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, but that was the thing. You know, there was not one thing that somebody was going to tell me to sway me from giving myself the opportunity to move forward. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's like such an important part of the process is to have a strong mindset. But at the same time, if somebody said, well, what's the greatest flaw that veterans bring into the transition process?
Yeah.
I mean, just to be as blunt as possible, it's hubris, right? Hubris is like one notch down from arrogance, right? Hubris is, you know, I'm not waving it in your face like arrogance, but it's miles away from confidence.
Yeah.
It's a false sense of being able to do something you haven't done before. And I think anybody who's gotten out and can look back and be like, wow, I don't even know how I got here because I didn't know anything when I started, right? I thought I had it all figured out.
Yeah.
I talk to guys who are, you know, again, not to condescend to anybody's experience, but, 48 months out of their undergraduate program, they're maybe 25, maybe 26.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I'm ready to be an operations director for a Fortune 500 company. Like, all right. Okay, cool. Let's hear it this time,
Yeah.
Be like, yeah, you did run a huge multinational fleet operation. That's awesome. It took you like 3 years to even get to that room. And then you and 90 other dudes sat down and got it done. So, like, don't tell me about how this, like, this national logistics company is going to be a direct one-to-one translation. Like, it's nothing like that,
It's funny, this kind of directly relates to, there was this image I came across, and this was years ago when I came across it. There was an image online where I saw, it says, because of the differences in education and military work experience, there should be different recruiting and branding strategies for officers and enlisted veterans. So, and there's redacted stuff on it, so I don't know what company it's from or, who wrote it, but there's a few redacted areas. So I know that it's from a recruiter. I know it's got to be, because on one side it says officers and one side it says enlisted, and on the officer side it says, generally, officers will be better suited for leadership, strategy, planning, or analytical roles. Officer recruiting should focus on, and then XYZ, like recruiting military alumni from industry, blah, blah, blah. And then enlisted, it says, generally, enlisted members will be better suited for operational or tactical roles, focusing on roles such as call center or similar operational roles. And like, just hearing that, hey, here I am, a 10-year Marine Corps vet, and whatever redacted job this is that I would be best suited for call center, like, just put this gross, I want to punch somebody in the face feeling, right? But at the same time, I'm listening to how intricate the job role of, especially the officers that left West Point and the Naval Academy, being here and seeing what they go through. We didn't do that as enlisted. So hearing you talk about it kind of gets rid of some of that saltiness. But at the same time, what about those, 18-year master gunnery sergeants? How do you approach the enlisted that have been in for all their life and have kind of been in those roles?
Well, if I was talking to an 18-year master gunnery sergeant, I'd ask him why he got kicked out 2 years before his pension.
Man, so some people just like have had it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's not, not everybody does 20 for the sake of 20. So obviously, I'm gonna circle and I'm gonna highlight and I'm gonna draw arrows at the word generally.
Yeah.
Right. So let me give you a sort of a weird sidebar philosophically. Right. I personally believe that every single time you encounter somebody, a stranger, a job candidate, a client, the only presupposition you should take into that interaction is that you're talking to an individual.
Yeah.
So, thinking about guys that I served with in the military, right? Were there E5s that I wish, why did you not get commissioned? You'd be so much better than your division officer at what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
You don't even need the degree, man. Just go buy some bars from the store and just show up to work. Everything will work out if that happened.
Yeah.
And were there officers that I'm like, man, I would not trust you to mop the barber shop,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been in the recruiting industry long enough to see officers from awesome pedigree show up to a job and totally bone it up. on day one. Just F-, you're fired, get out of here, you know? And I've seen, you know, enlisted guys come back at the next hiring conference wearing, you know, a promotion on their name tag, and now they're the client who's making the hiring decisions. You're like, dude, that was like 9 weeks. And he's like, yeah, I'm awesome. You're like, you are awesome. That's amazing, you know?
Yeah.
So when we say generally, mechanics who joined the Navy when they were 18 and now are 25, and they're getting out and they don't have a college degree, generally there's some jobs that are a good fit for those people.
Yeah.
You know, generally, people who have a bachelor's degree and then 5 years of commissioned service and now they're 26, generally there's some jobs that align with that. And what that is it's our ham-fisted attempt to try to put some language on paper that if you're in the active duty and you don't speak civilian, you can kind of, you know, connect the dots over to the other side and say, okay, so I get what we're looking at.
Yeah.
I will also want to throw this out there, right? Everybody listen to this. Call centers aren't a bad thing. I have a very close friend, a guy I lived with. He was my roommate when we were SWOs. We shared this giant beach house. There's 4 of us on the north end of Virginia Beach, on the beach side, total bachelor pad. And this dude ended up getting out of the military. He took a job with a small technology startup down in Charleston. And he ended up, as a part of his job, we were all at a bachelor party in the Outer Banks, and he had the duty cell phone in his pocket where he was like the call center manager for customer service. And so, you know, when you say to yourself, all right, you know, hey, call center, that sounds pretty lousy. Well, here's a startup technology company where the success of their product, the success of the customers that have trusted them with their money to get a viable solution to make their business move forward falls in the hands of these people answering the telephone.
Okay.
And it's your leadership challenge to get that done. I mean, it's, you know, look, to say that leading a call center is below the station of an active duty service member is to say that leading a fleet watch floor below the station of a lieutenant commander. And that would be a big surprise to all the lieutenant commanders on the fleet watch floor over at Sublant right now. Yeah. You know, so, you know, yeah, sometimes the call center, they're answering telephone calls about, why didn't my Fandango gift card work? Right? Okay, that sucks. Sometimes they're answering phone calls about really complex technical, you know, software as a solution, or software as a service questions, and that is a totally different ballgame, right? So
these are some of the things that I mean, we haven't even really got into what you're doing now, and this is what you do. This is what you've been doing for a while, and people don't know because you don't know what you don't know. Right. And I was having a conversation today about how I found my major, right? I just graduated with my master's in sports psychology, and that is not something I knew about more than like 2 years ago. I didn't know anything about sports psychology. And that's what you're doing with me right now. Like, hey, man, look, call center, sure, it sounds sleazy, but it can be sexy, you know? And you've been around it long enough to be educated on, you know, these roles and these jobs, and you help people kind of get out of their own way. And I think that's admirable. I mean, I don't even think there's a question in it. But like, I mean, that's something that you do. You help people, you know, find jobs that they didn't think about before, like you introduced it to them, right?
Yeah. I remember the first conversation I ever had with any recruiter ever. It was like, I had no idea what I was going to say to this person. They were asking me all these questions about what I wanted to do, where I wanted to be, making it up by the seat of my pants. And being a candidate and experiencing that was really valuable as a recruiter, because then when I'd be on the other side of that, I'm like, yeah, this guy's probably, I called him at like 4:15 on a Tuesday. This isn't necessarily like his life plan, right?
Yeah.
But I remember the recruiter I was talking to at the time asked me whether or not I was interested in sales, right? And so like, don't think of the color blue. Right? You know how that trick works, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing that happened in my head was those mineral makeup people that for whatever reason always seem to have like an Eastern Mediterranean accent. And they, you know, you're walking through the mall and they like grab you by the windpipe and they're like, come here, I want to show you something. And start smearing makeup on you, you know? Like that's what I thought sales was. That's what I thought they meant. And I was like, no, I'm not interested in sales. And they're like, oh, why not? What's wrong with sales? And then I had that conversation with my uncle that I referenced later, and I was like, oh, I get it. I don't know what sales is.
Yeah.
So I think there's so many things like that on the other side where for whatever reason, right? Yeah. Whatever experience you've had, whatever academic training, exposure or lack of exposure to the U.S. economy. Like if you're in the military and you don't know what the terms even mean, how in the world are you going to go do that for a living?
Yeah.
So that to me is like the huge crisis that folks face as they say, I'm really interested in business development, but I don't want to do sales.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
So when we build out a profile for a candidate, we can put in there, hey, this guy wants to do consulting or construction or acquisitions, and there's a whole list of different occupations. So as we go through this consultative process of, hey, I'm looking into this whole like network defense thing. I think this is where my head's at. I want to go this route, right? We can tag that up so that when that job pops, they'll reference that and they'll get contacted as a match.
Yeah.
For our purposes, business development and sales is the same thing. It's business development / sales, right? You are going to potential customers or clients and you're getting their money in exchange for product or service.
Yeah.
Whether that happens over some lengthy, high-level 18-month conversation and you're just sort of floating along managing the project, or if you're like sitting in a call center ripping through cold calls out of some kind of like call database trying to get your first lead, yeah, there's shades of gray in between those two things, but you can't say, hey, I'm interested in developing, lines of business for the company, but I don't want to sell. It's like, it's a contradictory statement. So those sorts of things, and I hear them all the time, it's getting people in the right space. Because if you said that in a sales interview, if they can manage not to laugh at you, that's great, but it's probably not going to move forward very far.
Yeah. Yeah. So what does a Bradley Morris recruiter and veteran candidate relationship look like from start to finish?
Yeah, so it depends on when the initial contact occurs. Let me talk to you what I would consider the best case scenario for our purposes, and then I'll address what the likely reality is. We want to talk to people the moment they decide that they are 51% getting out of the service before they accept their next set of orders. So when you're in the shower one morning and you say, you know what, I don't know if I'm going to this kooky shore duty at the shipyard for 5 years, you need to go fill out a candidate profile like that day. And the reason for that is, and this is not going to sound very novel, like there's no such thing as too much time to plan your transition.
Yeah, that's a true story.
And there's never been a job seeker that didn't wish they had a 36-hour day.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the further out you can start to program your brain with the relevant terms, the industry knowledge that only comes through that sort of loose recreational research that people do when they're like, I would refer to it as like structured daydreaming. That's where we need to be, 18 months, 24 months.
Okay.
Now, what's the reality?
Yeah.
Most folks come to us about 6 to 9 months. That is the statistical window where we see people come into the program.
Oh, that's still impressive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so 6 to 9 months, just from my experience, that's usually when you say to yourself, hey, like, I've told my superior that I will not be signing on to the next tour.
Yeah.
And in many cases for officers, if you, like, there's not a huge amount of companies that are going to request your evals, your fit reps, or your OERs, or whatever your branch calls them, but there are some, and you certainly don't want to leave the military and not do everything you can to have the best paperwork you can. So, like, if you went 2 years out, you show up on your first day at a new command on a 2-year set of orders, and day one you say, hey, sir, I'm going to get out in 2 years. Like, you just took yourself out of consideration for any of the cool things that might come from being the top performer in your block.
Yeah.
So there's often some value in not, like, screaming this from the mountaintop too far out. And so that's something to consider. But when we get those folks at 6 to 9 months, the typical first step is that they usually either come in on the website and want to contact us via email, or they get somebody's phone number from a friend of a friend. And I cannot emphasize enough, if you've used a recruiter and you found anybody's specific service valuable, please refer that person on a direct basis, like John Heck, right? He works in our office. He's a former Master Chief. He commissioned the USS Bush, the carrier here in Norfolk. Mm-hmm. When somebody says, hey, I worked with John Heck, I want to refer my friend to work with John Heck. That's totally allowed, and that's the best kind of relationship that we can have between a candidate and a recruiter.
Okay.
But so those folks come in the system, they fill out a candidate profile. I'm trying to think about ways to make this shorter, but it's 2 pages, so it doesn't take a huge amount of time, maybe 5-10 minutes. And so page 1 is telling us who you are, and page 1 is telling us what you want. So page 1 is like, I'm an 03, here's my email, this is my password, I have this degree or that degree. And then page 2, you go into like, where do you want to live? What kind of positions do you want to do? What kind of money do you want to make? Travel, shift work, any of the things that we're going to use to make a match with you. And our profile's set up so that when you hit save, if you're inside 120 days, you're an active candidate. You are matchable to our jobs.
Yeah.
So loading a resume at that step, however terrible you think it is, like quite honestly, if you're at a junction to say, hey, I've got a Word document that has my first name, last name, phone number on it, right? Give us that. So that we know how definitely to get a hold of you. But so if you're outside that window, it's not 120 days yet. You won't start seeing matches. You're sort of in a standby training pipeline status.
Yeah.
So from there, we have a list of specific ranks and military specialties that get funneled to recruiters. We also have a list of folks that go to the recruitmilitary.com database. And Recruit Military is our sister company. So if you were a personnel clerk and you made it all the way to the rank of E2 and now you're looking for a job, you will go to the Recruit Military database if you fill out a Bradley Morris candidate profile.
Okay.
There is a limitation to the specialties and the kinds of candidates that Bradley Morris works with because we have a limited amount of attention and resources, and we have some specific client needs.
Yeah.
And so we've custom curated the candidates that we recruit. And I make no mistake, it's like basically every officer and 80% of the enlisted specialties. But there are some folks that just there's not a whole lot of opportunity for us, or we're not the best fit for you, and that's probably more the case with most people.
Okay.
So
what makes one not the best fit?
Not the best fit. If you don't have a college degree, just corporate America is going to be closed up. There's a lot of white collar jobs that won't even interview you.
Yeah.
And you see the job description says must have a bachelor's degree. Well, bachelor's degree in basket weaving, and you're in the door.
Yeah.
Right. But if you don't, or if you have an associate's, and you're like, what's the difference? It's not a bachelor's degree. So if you don't, and you don't have any kind of maintenance leadership or technical hands-on maintenance experience, it's going to be really difficult for us to help.
Okay. Is that Bradley Morris specific?
That's any recruiting firm.
Okay.
And I mean, I don't want to speak for the others out there, but I mean, I've been doing this long enough. They're not doing anything we're not doing.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, so Recruit Military, right? So, okay, hey, I got punted to your sister company. What does that mean? Well, that's the largest veteran-only job ecosystem in the known universe, right? I guess that's reasonable to say.
Not until Space Force.
Until the Space Force. We gotta change the website.
In the universe. All right.
So that job board, and I tell you, so there's a lot of reasons to be super, super excited about the Recruit Military job board if you are a military veteran job seeker. Not to spill any beans that I shouldn't spill, but we are jumping on board with machine learning in order to optimize the way we match candidates to the open positions. And there's several hundred open positions that clients have posted to that job board at any given time. And so what you will experience if you end up in Recruit Military is that you will have artificial intelligence reviewing not just the information you provide when you fill out the profile and load a resume, but also information on your LinkedIn profile, your Facebook profile. So if we can cross-connect that because your name matches and your employer matches,
interesting,
we're going to get all that data in there, and it's going to give us the possible match solution. You're going to see emails that are going to say, hey, you're a fit for these 4 or 5 jobs. Click here to apply, and it'll take you right to the job application.
Yeah.
So that is our next level force multiplier we're trying to add into the mix to try to really supercharge that.
Nice.
So on the Bradley Morris side, if you kind of pass through those filters and you end up in the hopper with a recruiter contacting you, you'll probably hear from somebody within about a couple of days. Now, if you fill this out and you're 5 years away and you put 2023 on your application, like that dude is helping somebody who's out next week. Yeah. So give it a minute.
Yeah.
But if you're in that 6 to 9 month window, you'll probably hear from somebody fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And they'll walk you through, all right, is your profile totally filled out top to bottom? A really significant conversation about what you want to do.
Yeah.
Include their expertise and say, hey, people like you usually end up in places like this.
Yeah.
If we can't help, like I had a candidate, we were doing a mock interview kind of early on in the process.
Yeah.
And I asked him just a softball, where would you like to be 5 years from now, right? Yeah. Everybody who's going to a job interview should know the answer to this question.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be extensive. His answer was
in my underwear on the couch.
No, it was even weirder than that. Well, not weirder, right? Good on the guy. And I hope he does what he told me he would be doing as of now, right?
Yeah.
I haven't seen the news story yet, but he told me, I hope to be completing my organic chemistry PhD researching spontaneous neobiogenesis, the process of inanimate material becoming self-replicating life. Okay, cool. So this is an interview to be a maintenance manager at a salad factory. So if we can't help you to where you say you want to be, we'll be real upfront about it, you know?
Hey, I
don't need you saying that to a client, you know?
Let me ask this, because that brings up maybe it's a myth. So you do the mock interviews and say, so let's take this guy, for instance. No, I mean, he's way too abstract, but I see myself as a teacher, right? I want to be teaching. Is that something that right off the bat makes you obsolete? Because you're not becoming a team player at that point, right? You're saying that I'm still looking to do something else in my life and not be full-time for you, right? Is that a thing?
Well, if you approach an employer and they ask you where you see yourself and you say teacher, right? Let's pretend you're doing a mock interview with me.
Yeah.
Right. So what I'm going to say is, okay, let's talk about that. Right. So when I first started, and I don't believe they're a client anymore, but we had a company that was based largely on the western half of the United States that was a charter school. And they would hire military officers, usually a little bit more on that senior 03, junior 04 level, to come into a leadership development program that would basically walk them through the various functions of becoming a principal of a school.
Okay.
So every school is a restaurant. Every school is a travel agency. Every school is a security company. Gotcha. Every school is a nurse's office, right? So they basically move you through the various management functions so that by the time you'd been on board for, I think it was 24 months, you would be stationed or assigned rather to a school where you'd go be the principal.
Yeah, okay.
So if that was your answer and you're interviewing for that school, or if you're not interviewing for that school, right, we need to align those interests. Yeah. Now, that's a very specific definition of teacher.
Yeah.
Now, if you said to yourself, I enjoy teaching and mentoring people, well, let's wordsmith that, right? Gotcha. So we're a company, we're hiring you, you're going to come in, you're going to be a technician who's going to repair our precision approach radars at the airports that buy technology from us. And you told me you see yourself as a teacher. And we hire people like you all the time. 18 months from today, you will have completed your training and qualification rotation. You'll go through your assessment with your, onboarding coordinator. And then we will give you a $250 an hour raise to take a, junior trainee under your wing who we hired from Bradley Morris at the last, big hiring event. And that person's just like you, and you are now going to be their preceptor and walk them through the same pipeline that you went through.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, teacher, right? So I think that what you always have to do when you think about this answer, where do you see yourself, is think to yourself, am I going to give them a really, I see myself in, 28 west longitude, 42 minutes south, what? Or are you saying, I see myself mentoring my coworkers because I've reached a level of expertise that they admire. That's my goal for myself,
So, okay. I know you haven't talked about the process too much, but now there's also the job fairs. What happens from that moment, right? That's like a 2-day event.
We're out of the job fair business at Bradley Morris.
Oh, nice. What do you guys do?
Direct placement now.
Oh, shit, really?
One event
that's
usually at the end of March, and that's usually more of like a leadership conference.
Cool. So direct placement.
Yeah, job fairs. Job fairs have some huge pros if what you seek is a day of volume with the added benefit of your motor neurons firing when you make eye contact with another person, which is the whole sidebar, Google motor neurons. Right. So you get all these weird things that happen in your body when you meet somebody face to face, and that makes the hiring process a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But the biggest and probably the most conspicuous drawback is that if there's not a conference by you, or maybe more importantly, by the paying client, right, we can't necessarily fulfill that role. Yeah. We can't necessarily do business.
Yeah. Okay.
So Bradley Morris got out of the business of saying, hey, you got an immediate opening for a maintenance supervisor, a trading floor analyst in New York City. Yeah, come to the next conference in 9 weeks.
Yeah.
Right? So what we do now is that the moment an account representative who's working with a client gets permission to put a job in our system from the client, then they build that job in the system in an almost identical fashion to the way a candidate would build their profile. It's all the same fields. It's just a little bit different layout. They put a job description, and then they put some internal notes describing to their recruiting partner who the right candidate is. I've seen guys who put in there like Army 03, 12345 designator, and you're like, oh, cool, got it. You know, I've also seen really comprehensive job descriptions that were describing people that might have come from multiple service branches and all kinds of different backgrounds. So that's our internal talking points. That job, then, the recruiting partner is going to run the match list. The system's going to tell them all the people who overlap with the objective and subjective parameters of the job based on their profile. And then, you know, usually it's anything like 60% and above. They'll do like a resume review. And so this is all built into their console so they can pop through these resumes, you know, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then from the yes list, they have the ability to pick up the telephone and call you, leave you a voicemail. They can send you an automated text message through the system that's going to prompt you to click a link that will include the job description. And if you like what you see, you can apply right then and there by pushing yes. Mm-hmm. They might also send you an email that's going to have the same functionality. If you like this job, click yes. If not, tell us why. And that feedback process has been really valuable for us to understand how to tell our sales team to go out there and find the right jobs.
Yeah.
You know, you run a job through the candidate database, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. You don't get anybody clicking back on yes. And then you look at the no's, and every single one of them was the pay.
Yeah.
You turn right around to the client, you say, look, we had 150 veterans that we contacted. We had 7,000, 8,000 candidates we're working with at any given time across the enterprise.
Yeah.
Right? And out of the 200 we contacted, we got 150 responses, and 79 of them said the pay is too low.
Yeah.
That's meaningful information for companies to understand how to acquire veterans, but not just acquire them, but keep them.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely essential. If you see that and you're an active Bradley Morse candidate right now, that feedback is critical.
Okay.
Then from there, if you say yes, hey, I'm interested about this, right? Then we get this list. It comes back into the system and you say, all right, I got these however many people and these are the 12 that clicked yes. Then from those folks, we create finalists and the recruiting partner reaches out to usually the top 7 or 8. Those folks get screened up. They learn all the information they need to in a one-on-one phone call with that person. They probably have another follow-on phone call with the account rep in order to kind of organize their thoughts better. And this is all, like, we want you to be totally honest with us and understand where your needs and wants are, because if you're telling me that maybe the salary is enough, but you're really hoping they double it, right? That's bad news. We need to know right up front.
Yeah.
Not because we'll turn it off, but because we will set everybody's expectations accordingly.
Yeah.
And then from there, once everybody's happy on the inside, what we're always trying to do is get our clients to commit to pre-scheduled interview slots. It's the easiest way to not waste their time. And so we'll tell you, okay, hey, next Tuesday, they're doing interviews from 10 to 2 Eastern time. When are you available? Yeah, I need a 30-minute time block. Commit to a 30-minute time block, get everything set up. We ship the resumes as well as a sizzle sheet on each candidate over to the client. The client gets excited. And our commitment from the client is, you're going to keep these 4 interview slots open for me. You're not going to say no to the people I send you. I'm going to send you 4 people for 4 interview slots, and you're going to do 4 interviews.
Yeah.
Whether you think you see it on the resume or not.
Yeah.
And that has been the number one difference maker in our business. So a couple things happened when we went to this model.
Yeah.
First of all, we made a huge amount more placements, like wildly.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's really hard to get somebody's personality from a resume.
Exactly.
I mean, I was just telling a story today. This is all about me, by the way, Tim. I'm just making my podcast about me.
Sure. as is your prerogative.
Speaking of business school, I started USC's business school this week, right? A buddy of mine reached out to me yesterday and asked me, hey, how do you write a personal statement for grad school? Mind you, I have been accepted. This will be my 4th grad school that I've been accepted into, and I've finished one of the programs. So it's not that I'm a quitter. It's just that the first program was not the right fit, and then I transferred out of the second program into a closer school. The end of the story. So I've written 4 of these, right? And then not only that, like, you know, I've written a lot to prove who I am, essentially. He asked me what to write, and I said, look, man, put your why in there. I mean, you have to hit all the key parts, right? But you don't have to make it so robotic, because everybody's going to make it robotic. And so this last personal statement to USC, I started off with a poem from Coach John Wooden. And if you know anything about USC and UCLA, Coach Wooden is the most winningest basketball coach in all of basketball history for a male. And USC and UCLA are rivals, like hardcore crosstown rivals. And so I started my personal statement with a poem from the crosstown rival. And then the next paragraph I say, well, first off, who's starting their personal statement with the poem, right? And the next line I say, I've written so many of these that I just wanted to start this one off a little bit different. And I hit all the points, but I put as much of me and my personality into that personal statement. It's still, again, hit all the points, but you could absolutely know from reading that who I was. And I was accepted into the school 4 days later.
That's such a crucial point that I think so many people lose the plot on when they're thinking about how to approach marketing themselves as job candidates.
Yeah.
Is they think to themselves, I need to make a list on paper that proves to this company that I can do all they want and more.
Yeah.
And if that were the case, then you would be bored on your first day.
Yeah.
Right? So what you need to actually do when you write a resume is not prove to them that you are everything described in the job description they could ever hope for.
Yeah.
But think to yourself, well, what do they want out of this job description? Do they want somebody who's going to work hard to learn the role?
Yeah.
Like grad school is a great example, right? If you're applying to go to business school, you don't need to say in your statement of intent that you're a master financial analyst who could be the CEO of Goldman Sachs, but instead I'm going to go ahead and go to business school instead.
Yeah.
Like they know you don't know that stuff. That's why you're going to business school.
Yeah.
Right now at a job, if they're going to give you some money, they don't want you to show up and be like, we know you don't know how to do any of this, so we'll teach you, right? Because, I mean, that's not how reality works. But the resume, it's more describing, like what you intend, how hard do you intend to work for them?
Yeah. Because
you're showing them where you did it in the past, right? And so that's where a good resume says, hey, 5 years ago, I did X. It was measured by Y. Mm-hmm. And because of Z, we got, Q results.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be a whole lot deeper than that, I led a team of 15 weapons and systems technicians within a 6-month unit level training cycle, accomplishing a 99% readiness rating prior to deploying for 7 months overseas. Boom, that's it. That's like the most basic kind of job bullet you can put on a resume.
Yeah.
Right? And there's nothing in there about the force fleet multiplier, blah, 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 acronym, and this and that weapon system, and the ANQ, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Just tell me that you managed people in a time-sensitive environment towards significant project accomplishment, or whatever.
Yeah.
Operated over $250 million worth of surface-to-air radar systems while also troubleshooting over 49 different computer, whatever it is. Just describe it. And then from there, if I say to myself, hey, look, this guy's got... It seems to clearly be able to unite a team behind a common purpose, and 99% ain't bad. Then whatever that team is, and whatever the purpose is, and whatever the metric is, that's what you go learn.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. I've got 2 more questions about Bradley Morris.
Sure.
One of them is, once you get staffed, are we done? Is our love done? Are we breaking up?
No. We're gonna maintain a close relationship until you come back and start hiring from us.
Okay.
So I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek. I'll tell you what we tell clients. So our contract with clients is that if they hire somebody and we presented their resume and that person goes and starts on their start date, we send them an invoice. If they pay that invoice inside of 30 days, and we get the check back, we say, thanks for doing business with you. You got a guy on your production floor right now. We got a check in our accounts receivable. Good to go. The start date begins a 90-day counter. Mm-hmm. And that 90-day counter, if you get fired, reactivated, get a DUI,
Yeah.
Or if for whatever reason, after some soul searching, everybody comes together and says, look, this is not right.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I mean, there's the weird stories where like the one dude almost electrocuted somebody on his first day and they fired him on the spot. And then there's the stories where some guy says, hey, man, I feel terrible about this, but my wife's like really ill and we got to relocate and we can't live here anymore. Mm-hmm. Or anything in between, right?
Yeah.
Then that client has a credit with us. If they want us to work to refill that position and start from scratch.
Gotcha.
Right? And we got to go find another candidate and do a replacement.
Yeah.
Some cases they want a refund, in which case we do that. But what does that mean for a job seeker? If you go to a job, we're paying pretty careful attention to your onboarding process for this. And the person that works with that client directly and has a personal relationship with the person who probably hired you, they're going to find out, hey, yep, things are going great. Joe's doing awesome, taking off. Hey, Bobby's our top guy right now. He got top marks in all the training classes in his first week. We hear that stuff.
Yeah.
And If we don't, we remember that as well.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if you come back on day 91 and say, hey, this is cool and all, but I'm out of here, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I can help you strategize how to handle the situation that you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot place you with a different company, right? So I cannot put opportunities on your plate for you to accept a job offer where you will leave a client.
Mm.
So if you are a placed Bradley Morris candidate,
Yeah.
and you are intending to kind of sneak out the back door,
Yeah.
we're not going to unlock it for you.
Yeah.
Now, if you and the HR team come together and say, hey, this didn't work out, Bradley Morris, I need another guy. And oh, by the way, feel free to help, Susie over here find more employment.
Yeah.
Great. Perfect. We've done that lots of times.
Okay.
There's other cases where the employee may go to the boss and say, hey, this isn't working. I'd like, 2 weeks, put in 2 weeks, and I'd like to use Bradley Morris to help me find another job.
Yeah.
If that HR person or that company rep comes back and says, yep, this is all above board and we're totally fine with that, no hurt feelings and whatever, that's also fine.
Yeah.
But, I've had guys who are like at 5 months, are like, yeah, this is kind of neat. What else you got? And it's like, I don't got anything.
It's kind of a catch-22 because some of these guys are coming out 22, 24, and it's hard to say I know what my career is at that early age, Like I started over at 34.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, enough of that.
So, we've already mentioned 3 or 4 recruiting firms.
Yeah.
So one of them is in home.
One of them, yeah. So are college veterans who just graduate able to use your services?
Yes, absolutely. So there's no, I think at this point we're probably more than 60% of the placements we make. The candidate is not actively transitioning, like has already signed their DD-214 multiple years in the past.
Okay.
So the transit. If you think about it this way, right? Every single person that signed up for the military since 9/11.
Yeah.
How many of them are out there in the world versus the ones that are ETSing in the next 90 days?
Yeah.
Right. So it's if we didn't cater to industry experience, we'd be ignoring like 90% of the veteran population of the world that's looking for a civilian job.
How is it that I guess recruit military is becoming more widely known. I think that there's an untapped resource that's available for you guys.
I agree.
Yeah.
And so a couple months ago, Bradley Morris acquired a suite of companies. They have 4 different products. And so the headline company is MBAveterans.com. MBAveterans.com. And they have a product that is designed, it's I think it's October 12th and 13th this year in Chicago. It's designed for candidates who are finishing at the top 75 full-time MBA programs. Mm-hmm. Come to Chicago. It's, a huge networking event. It's all jobs that are specifically intended to be for full-time graduates who are matriculating and going to work either in the beginning of the year or right after the new year.
Yeah.
And that is a huge event. I mean, it's a fantastic event. And all the big schools, all the big names, it's in Chicago. So you get all the consulting people, all the advertising, marketing people.
Yeah, and pizza.
MBA Vets also has a separate product. It all happens in Chicago around the same time, but there's some digital stuff that happens in the background. But that's called Execuvets. And so if you're 9 to 10 years out of your MBA, you did the consulting thing, you did the startup thing, and now you're looking for that next big step.
Uh-huh.
This is the product for you. So that post MBA who's out there looking for something really significant.
Okay.
And that's again is networking, top level people who they know you have a top MBA.
Yeah.
That there's been some significant screening there. The other product that they offer is called Undergraduates, like undergraduates but vets. Right. It's just the most puntastic corporate names.
Gotcha.
So Undergraduates it's a job fair where companies know, hey, these are people who just finished undergraduate degrees.
Yeah.
And they came from the military, they got their GI Bill benefit, they went, they used it, and now they need work.
Okay.
The final product in their suite of 4, if you're that vet, you got your bachelor's degree already, you're transitioning out, you're considering a corporate career, you're also considering going to business school.
Yeah.
Business schools basically... Well, I'll be super blunt, right? They give us money and we make the connection happen.
Yeah.
And so there's also a business school networking event. You go to Chicago, you walk around the room, you talk to 25, 30 different business schools and help you make up your mind about whether you want to go in a civilian corporate direction or if you want to go back and get some academic training.
Yeah. Is there financial help or is there resources to help people get there and experience that?
That's a funny question. So this is actually, it's great you asked me this. there are usually at many of these institutions where people are getting some education and now they've got to get to Chicago to go to this job fair.
Yeah.
There's usually a veterans assistance or some sort of VA benefits office on campus.
Okay.
And for the last couple of events, the benefits coordinators that manage these veterans programs at these schools literally have been renting like vans, and they get their vets in the car, they drive them up to Chicago, they do the event, they drive them back.
That's cool.
And so I think last year the quota was like over half the undergraduate vets that came in like did some sort of a carpooling thing. So if you're interested in this and you're in school and you're considering your career prospects and you're like, hey man, this sounds great, I'm in, but I can't get to Chicago, get in that veterans benefits office, get with your fellow service members.
Yeah.
Everybody throws $30 in the jar and you get it done.
That's cool. And that's a good thought. And the Student Veterans of America on each campus, the SVAs, also can help tap into that. And I'll definitely preach, because in the book that I wrote, I preach about using the recruiters, the headhunters. And so I think it's a phenomenal experience. I can't speak ill about it.
That's true.
All right. Bradley Morris is life. So much so that, like, you're now podcasting for them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I, about a year ago, was approached by our CEO, and he asked me to step into a different role. We had acquired Recruit Military about a year prior, so now we're coming on 2 years. And we had not yet acquired MBA veterans. And we have a really strong team of client-side marketers. We've got super competent people in email marketing, behavioral automation, using all kinds of really fancy marketing tools, some great expertise in our PPC team that's just doing a fantastic job getting that digital advertising presence out there. But they assessed a lack of some candidate-specific messaging, or at least just some oversight of how these efforts were affecting candidates coming into the system. You could go broke on Google AdWords and never get a single person because
you ain't lying.
Random, right? Random strangers are clicking on your thing. You're like, can I have my $3 back? So we he approached me and said, hey, we kind of don't have a job description. We kind of do. It's sort of whatever. What do you think? You want to get into this? And I'd been working on some candidate training programs at the time, sort of trying to beef up some of our resources. And I thought, hey, yeah, this is kind of a nice little segue. It was an interesting transition. I quite frankly nothing about it. I mean, if you had asked me what is your experience with digital advertising, Facebook user, right? Full stop. So very quickly kind of jumped in. We were onboarding a new advertising agency to help us with some strategic consulting at the time. They were gracious enough to basically explain it like I was 5 every step of the way, and I picked up a lot. Mm-hmm. And we reached a point where I think I understood what was happening. We had all the moving pieces going in the right direction to add some candidate-related value. And we got to this point where I needed some content. Mm-hmm. I needed something to go on the internet that was going to tell the story. And I thought to myself, well, that's perfect. I did a lot of writing in college. We got a WordPress site, so I can just punch out blog posts like it's nobody's business. And I opened a Word document and I put a header on it of something job search. And I sat there and stared at a cursor blinking at me for like 5 hours. I thought, okay, this isn't working. Now, simultaneous to that, I was getting into some podcasts on my own as a consumer. Yeah. Everybody on earth, I assume, has heard of Joe Rogan's show. It's a long format conversation that I found to be just immensely fascinating.
Are you listening to all 4 to 6 hours of it?
Well, so I'm not an MMA guy. I totally appreciate it. If it's on, I'll watch it, but like I can't listen to 2 dudes with backwards hats talk about it for 5 hours.
Yeah.
So I kind of skip over those, but when he gets like a cognitive neuroscientist on who's researching like how dreams affect, whatever, it's like, okay, I'll listen to that whole thing like twice.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I started to absorb this content. I realized to myself, like totally no disrespect to Joe Rogan, but if that dude can like have just the most bomb media presence that exists in the world by sitting in a room smoking joints and talking into a microphone.
Yeah.
Like, there's absolutely no excuse why I can't take everything I've learned in my life and go make a really high-quality product that actually has a similar impact. You know, of course, I'm not there yet, but so instead of staring at a blank cursor in a Word document, I decided to go ahead and just pick up the microphone and start doing some podcasts.
Yeah.
Lo and behold, right? There's this other podcast out there everybody's heard of, EO Fire.
Mm-hmm.
John Lee Dumas has this great free podcasting course that you can sign up for. You surrender your email address, and he just unloads everything you need to know about podcasting into your inbox over the course of about 2 weeks. I get my, little here's today's email, tip 1, watch this video, and I'd go do it. Like literally, as I'm watching the video, I'm doing it. Mm-hmm. Here's how to set up a Libsyn account to host your media files. I'm like sitting there clicking through step by step. Mm-hmm. By the time I was done getting videos, like I had a podcast on my hands, I was like, oh, wow, look at that. It worked. Wow. And I copied his format. It's an interview-based format. You rip through 13 questions, very straightforward. Yeah. You do the same sort of thing over and over, and the answers are always different. And that's what's so interesting about it. Is like I can ask, everybody, here's an easy example, right? How's your day going?
Yeah.
Well, everybody you ask that question, you're going to get a different response.
Yeah, yeah.
And so in that regard, I realized that, like, I am literally having this conversation that I've had for 6 years at this company with the same exact kind of people, and all I've got to do is hit record on the corner of my screen, and I've got something that I can throw out to, well, I'll be honest, dozens of people, but potentially maybe thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people over time.
Yeah.
And so that to me was kind of where it really clicked and it came together.
Yeah. You've been at this, how many, you guys are at shy of 30, 40 episodes?
14 published right now, and I got, I think 3 or 4 more.
I was way off.
Cut together.
What have you learned so far?
If anybody out there wants to create any kind of audio content, go check out the dudes who, I can't believe I'm referencing this, like PewDiePie, do like video game talk over playthroughs.
I just snorted into the microphone.
Right? But those dudes know how to, they know how to cut content, right? Because they do it for a living. It's all they do.
Yeah.
Play video games. And I found this one video, this dude, it was so weird. He had like an Australian accent, but it sounded like he was trying to do like a Cartman impression. It was really bizarre. If you're a gamer, you probably know who I'm talking about. But he talked about like literally how to totally master your raw sound files in Audacity, which is the free sound editing program a lot of us use to make podcasts. And like he just put the flowchart. He's like, all right, open this menu, put these numbers in these menus and hit OK. And then do this and hit OK. And like literally, if you follow it exactly with my mic setup and the way that I record, it went from like, hey, that's not bad to like, holy cow, that's like the radio.
Yeah.
And so like that kind of stuff that's out there where some guy who is like ate a handful of Adderall and sat there and figured it out for 9 hours.
Yeah.
Like just go get it on YouTube. Don't worry about messing around with it.
That's probably the biggest thing I've learned, right? Is it's out there. All that people ask me all the time, how do you do that? Man, how do you do that? And I'm like, I taught myself. I legitimately went on YouTube. If you listen to some of my earlier episodes, you would hear pops and we would laugh and be like, ha ha, and it'd be just so just saturated.
Clippy.
Yeah, and clippy. And so, over time, one thing that I do is I listen to my own podcast. Yeah. And I critique it. And is it perfect? No. Is it perfect for a guy who has 40 other things going on in his life? No. But, yeah. But it's better. It's better than when I started. And that's because when I hear something, I'm like, I want to fix that and I want it to be better. And I go teach myself how to make it better.
At the same time, I heard this little tidbit, and this to me was where I just I hit the gas pedal and didn't look back on making this thing a reality. And the clip was perfection kills podcasts.
Yes. Yeah.
Man, you could sit there and get every sniff, snort, sneeze out of the background. And at the end of the day, when you're listening to things, the world exists around you, unless you got Bose noise canceling headphones on at the bottom of a swimming pool, you're going to hear stuff in the background.
Yeah. This is kind of way off topic. So, you remember you were talking about Facebook and, it would be funny to be Tim Mossholder's friend?
Yeah.
And you have your own podcast now?
Yeah.
Do you know that Tim Mossholder, the pastor, was also on a podcast?
Was he really?
I Googled, because I wanted to find the podcast name. And it says, Pastor Tim Mossholder, Searching for Success, Podcast Part 1.
If he's doing a motivational success podcast, I don't know how, if anybody else in the universe would think this was funny, but wouldn't that be funny? Tim Mossholder interviews Tim Mossholder. You have to. And he's out there in California. Yeah. You have to. You have to. Well, okay.
So your podcast is Veteran Influencer, right?
Right.
What are you doing?
Everything's got to have an acronym.
Yeah. Would you say VIP? Veteran Influencer Podcast, VIP.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing over there?
So the goal is to essentially provide a snapshot in a 25 to 45 minute format that people can listen to in their car or during their personal time in the evenings or when they're doing their morning routine. I listen to this is weird. I throw Stephen Colbert's show on from the night before when I'm in the shower. So whatever it is that's your weird habit where you get your content, it's designed to fit into a nice half-hour time block where we're going to get somebody who's made it to the other side, who's taken off the uniform and is now like really doing something, right?
Yeah. Not,
hey, I'm in the middle of a job search, I got an offer, it's going great, but like I'm out, it's great, and then it sucked, and then it was great again, and here's what happened, right? And that whole timeline so that now we can see. I don't want to overuse the term self-actualized, but people who have really made it out.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think I mentioned I'm seeing trends with some of my guests, especially in questions like when would you have started transitioning, right? What are you seeing trends with your guests? I know that it's been a handful, but a handful is enough to see a trend.
Yeah, I mean, well, I can so whether it was from my podcast guests, and there's not that many of them, or it's 6 years of getting on the phone and talking to veterans that are going through that process just from my day job. There's a couple of things that everybody reports back, right? Nobody has ever told me that they regretted starting so early because they had way too much time on their hands.
Yeah.
0 out of like tens of thousands of conversations.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, right? And I know this is like, oh, hey, great advice, start early. Yeah, I learned that in like preschool, man. But like, okay, fine, but this is really serious. The other thing that everybody's told me is that they wildly overestimated how easy they thought their transition process would be.
Yeah.
And then kind of, 2B of that is they didn't understand how long the process of really like not feeling like they primarily identified with their active duty identity, like how long that took. And in my own experience, I'd be lying if I said that it was less than like 2, maybe 3 years of not being in uniform and not driving to the base and not doing everything I did before I was like, hey man, like you're not a Navy officer anymore, right? And right around 36 months I was like, oh, I get it now. I'm like this totally other guy.
Yeah. And I'll add to that and say transition is just a forever process.
Yeah. That's an interesting point, right? So to go back to kind of my life story that we hit on early on in the show, I made a big transition from the West Coast, where I was in a private school, to the East Coast, where I went to a public school. And I showed up and then immediately was the youngest kid in the class. And everybody assumed it's because I was some sort of smarty pants. And oh, by the way, just to make my life really easy and smooth during this period of uncertainty and change, I rolled up with like bleach blonde spiked hair. Think Sugar Ray,
like
right?
Mark McGrath.
Yes, exactly. That was the look.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in California, everybody spiked their hair.
Yeah.
The cool kids bleached their hair.
Yeah.
And you would have thought I can't even say on your show what the things that I got called for that, right? So, and then like years later, dudes start rolling around with spiked hair, and I'm like, yeah, hey, welcome to like friggin' 5 years ago, man. So the East Coast and the West Coast, right? They have different cultural sensibilities. But now looking back on that, man, if somebody's like, hey, you got to move to Saudi Arabia and we're going to pay you $900,000 to do it, like, piece of cake, man. You mean I don't have to go to middle school in a brand new place? Right? And then, I did my Eagle Scout project and standing on the step one and then being at the end of it and looking back and being like, oh, that's all that took, you know? So every time you do that, like, I'm not trying to underestimate the difficulty of these things and sound cocky, but like I graduated from the Naval Academy and I look back and I was like, well, that's a thing I can do. Yeah. Yeah. And then I went to flight school and I did really well. I mean, I was number 1 out of primary and I was like, well, okay, that went pretty well. Yeah. I could do that. And every time you do something crazy, like you jump up a level in confidence, and it's like exponential. Yeah. So I did the Navy officer thing, earned a SWO pin. I got it in my shadow box. That's a thing I can do. Yeah. And so every time you do that, and then you go to these next phases of life, and they become less scary. And
I want to ask this, right?
Is terrifying.
Let me ask this. You're talking about jumping up levels of confidence, right? And that the more you do, the more you build on. And this is kind of like more of a mindset question. I'm working under Dr. Nate Zinzer, who's one of my field's grandfathers. He's worked with Olympians. And he says that one of his athletes for years she just did not think she was good enough. He's like, why are you not good enough? And she's like, I'm just not confident. He's like, you're one of the best track athletes in the world, 4.2 GPA. Like, everything about you is just phenomenal. And he says that it is these people, a lot of these high-reaching, overachieving, a lot of these people suffer from a lack of confidence.
Imposter syndrome.
I definitely suffer from imposter syndrome. Like,
it's a real thing.
It's a real thing. Absolutely. 1,000% yes. 1,000% yes.
The hardest thing for me is figuring out when I'm suffering from imposter syndrome and when I'm just being lazy.
What do you mean by that? Break that apart.
So there's a lot of times,
how long do I have you?
Let me say this, probably like one more kind of rant and then we got to wrap.
Okay.
But I'll talk about this because this is relevant to the transition process, right?
It's super relevant.
So people get out of the military and they don't have any confidence. Or maybe they do, but maybe it's really misplaced, right? It's again, back to hubris, right? It's like, I can do anything. It's like, yeah, anything a SWO would get billeted to do, right? But you can't go be like a, real estate analyst or whatever until you get the training, and then you can do it, right? Yeah. You have the potential. You don't have the experience.
Yeah.
So for me, I find myself at this balance where people are like, man, this is going great. This is awesome. You're doing a great job. Piece of cake. And it's like, man, I spent the morning like doing keyword research or something, like just like Googling stuff to see what would pop up and then making a list.
Yeah.
So that's what I did at work, Oh man, podcast sounds great. Yeah, I sat there and I listened to like death metal while I cut out the like little knocks in the background. It took me an hour, It's like, well, that's work. That's what you do. So I think a lot of times what you have to really think to yourself is like, what actually defines the work that you're going to do? Right? And that's where you can say, I either made progress on the things that I needed to do or I didn't. And I think that in the military, there's so often that, part of being good at your job is being there on time, looking the right way. Did you shave correctly? Mm-hmm. Are your boots properly blackened or whatever the case may be? And, hate to say it, people sometimes mistake the fact that they're able to maintain like basic professional standards with like being excellent. I was a color man at inspection. Well, okay, great. Like we wear golf shirts to work here. So whatever, and so having confidence in things that are real, like things that actually moved the needle is super important. But you don't get that confidence unless you've figured out a way to measure it.
Yeah. And
that's what the military doesn't support you with. They don't give you a budget to compare your performance against, like a maintenance program is probably as close to a solid, like ironclad 2-digit number that you can actually kind of bounce off of.
Yeah.
I'm 99% of my maintenance checks accomplished on time, right? And, 98% quality rating wherever. Okay, well, great, perfect, right? There's an actual like checklist you can follow.
Yeah.
When you become a civilian and you're out there in the world and people are like, hey, is your digital marketing program healthy? And you're like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, are we getting leads? Are we paying too much for them? Are they performing? When I send a guy an email, does he come back and say, hey, this is exactly what I wanted? Or does he say unsubscribe, right? And so that's how you have to measure that performance. And it's really hard to like totally wrap your arms around it because there's not a dashboard that pops up with green, yellow, and red on it.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the case where I say, no, because I followed steps that I established early on that these things are set and they're doing well, and these things are set and they're doing well, and these things are set and they're doing well. And that then you have to be able to like pivot to another beneficial task. And that's kind of where the podcast came from, right?
Yeah.
I got all my little lead channels set up, all my vendors are coordinated, I got this software system established, that one's talking to this one. Now what, right? Well, go make some content. Get on the phone, talk to people, expand the brand presence.
Yeah.
And so that's where you can kind of like cure imposter syndrome, is just by knowing that like even if you're walking forward on a treadmill, you're still getting exercise, you know? And so when you're getting out of the military and people are like, okay, well, I've done great things in the military. I don't know if they had a real meaningful impact. How do I tell a company about that? You don't need that kind of certainty to get a job offer.
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, the word certainty, it's like it exclusively defines the past tense. Right? Because if you're certain of something, that, people are being hyperbolic when they say, I'm certain this will happen. Mm-hmm. You're not. We could get hit by an asteroid and the whole Earth gets vaporized, right? Yeah. So that's possible. Yeah. Probably will happen, hopefully. So certainty is when you look back and you say, I saw what happened and I understand it. And so this is something I just totally rip off from Tom Wolfe. He's got a lot of great content out there. He was originally part of career development, I think, and some of his content still lives in our ecosystem. He's written books. Definitely get on Amazon, buy his book if you're out there looking to transition. But Tom Wolfe said this great. Certainty will only accrue after you have the experience to kind of validate that mental expectation you have of yourself. Mm-hmm. So if you expect to feel totally certain that you're making the right decision when you accept an offer, you are holding yourself to an entirely unrealistic standard.
Yeah.
And anybody who's ever proposed to somebody and then gotten married knows how that feels, right? Am I certain that for the rest of my life, this relationship is just good as gold on cruise control? No, I'm certain it's not, That's the only certainty I have.
Yeah.
But, right, it's a commitment to work really hard to make it happen.
Yeah.
Whether that's my job or my relationship or my hobbies or just my mental well-being, my self-care. Like, it's work. You have to move your body around to get it to happen.
Yeah.
And so that to me is like, if you think of your life that way, then what you're doing and who you're doing it for, that's totally secondary to like this sense of purpose you can imbue your actions with.
Yeah. Yeah. That's huge. And it's great information, actually. So I do want to honor your time. I've got just two like real quick hitters.
Sure.
The first being, what would you tell vets who are struggling to find themselves today?
Oh boy. Read.
Yeah. Anything particular?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, the easiest recommendation to make about that is this is kind of a job search guide, but quite honestly, in my mind, this is more of like a transitioning identities guide. Is the it's a workbook by Richard Bowles. It gets put out every year. It's updated to match the current state of the economy. It's called What Color is Your Parachute? Absolutely fantastic text. I picked that up about 4 years into recruiting. Mm-hmm. And said to myself, oh, let's see what else is out there for the rest of the world. And like, as I'm going through it, I'm like, oh my God, I got to do this myself. Like, it was such an important exercise.
Yeah.
And you go through each of these chapters and each of these steps and kind of put down, like, what do you love doing? Just list everything. Just write it on paper. And then you kind of whittle it down from there. And you're like, oh, I get it. Like, what kind of people do you like to be around?
Mm-hmm.
That's like, did you think about that when you signed up for the military? I didn't think about that,
I still don't know.
Right? So it forces you to kind of ask yourself these questions. And then the other thing is, if somebody's struggling to identify, create content.
Yeah.
Right? And so again, I'll jump at like a Seth Godin type piece of advice. His whole thing, he puts a blog post up on his blog every single day. Not because he's got something to say, but because he's the kind of person that insists on saying something every day.
Mm-hmm.
And, his advice is if you're not confident enough to go out there and really like put your name on it, make it anonymous, and there's tons of tips. I won't spare the time to do it, but like you can go make a website and nobody knows who you are. And that's a thing. That's possible.
Yeah.
So, right. Put it on paper. It doesn't have to be good. Nobody has to read it. It's literally only for you. And if it's more than that, then you might have a job opportunity on your hands or a new business that you decided to start because your blog got a huge amount of traffic.
Yeah.
People were interested in what you were saying.
Yeah. And you never know, right? You never, ever know.
You never know. And that's the thing in that if it doesn't work with a blue background and red font, or don't use red font, whatever, right? If like the picture of the eagle in the corner doesn't get it done, then make a new website.
Yeah.
Create a new blog, make a new topic. Yeah. Once you know how to do that one time, like you're a web developer now, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you're an amateur, hobbyist web developer, but you can do it.
Yeah.
So writing and reading, to me, that's the secret, because the only way you can program your brain is by writing and reading, right? Your brain is a computer. You got to stick software in it, and it enters and it exits through, reading and writing.
And last thing is, where do you see yourself 5 years? No, what is your legacy? I see myself
in an upwardly mobile leadership role within your organization.
What is your legacy? What's your legacy?
So I think what I'm angling for right now is I want to position this functional area of technology, digital advertising, and candidate services in a way. Mm-hmm. Like, so to be totally frank, and I hope none of my coworkers are listening to this, I want to create a program that I can walk away from.
Yeah. I hope your coworkers are listening, by the way.
Well, I want to be able to say, look, you see how good this is?
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
Now that to me is mostly just going to be about empowering other people, right? And so I think that in my goal to move my career forward, I need to like leave stuff behind that's sustainable, and to grab another, Boy Scoutism, leave the campsite cleaner than I found it.
Yeah.
And, I think that's something that's important for anybody. And one of my podcast guests, who's a guy at Amazon, said this best, I'm the most effective leader if nobody needs me. Right.
Yeah. 1,000%.
If you can't walk away from your desk for 5 minutes without the world falling apart, you are failing to lead accordingly.
Yeah. That is huge. And I hope anybody listening can sit on that for a minute. Literally pause and sit on that for a minute. Because I think too many people, guilty, right? I take on a lot of stuff, but I also teach as I go, that's a big one. And I think people should sit on that, even like after this and they're eating dinner and like, what am I doing to help walk away from the desk and nobody needs me? Yeah, that's cool, man. Tim Mossholder, not the pastor.
Yeah, that's the next episode.
Not Pastor Mossholder. Man, I keep having fun with you every time we get on the phone, and I'm sorry it took so long. It'll definitely be a two-parter, but I appreciate you. Definitely congratulations on the marriage. Congratulations on the new podcast. And I would love all of the listeners of You're the Vet to tap into Veteran Influencer Podcast, V.I.P. It's a Bradley Morris hosted podcast, and it won't be, I guarantee, man, it's your first of few or many. I'm already trying to look into whichever ones I want to get into. I'm trying to do one with my wife and pulling her to shirt tails, but
all the different personalities that live in your head will get some microphone time.
Exactly. 1,000. Yes. Yes. But other than that, if you want to tap into Tim, I will have all of his information on the show notes. I'll have all the information of what we've talked about. Definitely, please, if you're a veteran getting out 9 months?
As early as you think you're
as
more
early
than
as
a coin flip.
51%.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably 6 to 9 months is when most folks will get that profile figured out. And again, we begin the actual matching interview process around 120 days from the first day you can show up. So if you get out on the 1st of June and you've got 3 weeks to move, and so the 28th is a better start date, right? Count backwards 120 from June 28th.
Yeah. I'm not doing it.
I'm not doing it.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what Google's for.
I absolutely recommend going through these. It gets you in front of as many people as possible. Believe me, it's more efficient than getting on monster.com or usajobs.com or whatever it is.com that you've been stressing to put your one job application in every 2 hours. Believe me, it's absolutely worth it. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to them. It's bradleymorse.com.
Bradleymorse.com.
Yeah, it's bradleymorse.com. It's simple. Just register, look for the vet tab, and go on from there. And Tim, again, if you ever want to get back on here and you've got something to push out, this is your platform forever, man.
Cool. I appreciate it. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun.
All right, man. For those of you staying tuned, thank you for tuning in, and remember that you are heroes. Live like one. I want to thank you for listening to another episode of You're the Vet, and please, again, share this with your friends, share this with your family, share this with other veterans, and share this with anybody who is interested in podcasts and just wants to hear good stories. Please go to the social media sites of You're the Vet and like and follow them. Engage with the community, engage with me. Make sure you head on over to you'rethevet.com to check out other episodes from other amazing veterans out there doing amazing things. And when that pop-up comes up, put your email in there and subscribe to the email list so that I can keep you updated with new conversations with new guests, as well as things that's going on in the community. So last but not least, please head on over to iTunes or whatever you're listening to You're the Vet on, and please write a review. Again, thank you for tuning in once again, and remember, you are a hero. Live like one.